Chapter 2841. Demon God Divine Domain. Yi Xian didn't even know about such a terrifying place before. At this moment, Yi Xian felt powerless. He really wanted to say that it wasn't that he was suppressing his cultivation, but that his cultivation was really only at the God King realm. Unfortunately, Yi Xian didn't dare to say it. After all, the God King realm was simply an exception here. Oh, isn't it just a realm? What's there to care about? Yi Xian suppressed the shock in his heart and said indifferently to that person. Who knew that person would actually smile and say, "That's true. In our first level, basically everyone has just entered the Origin Secret Realm. How could there be so much to pay attention to? I reckon that everyone is about the same. It's already not bad if they can break through to the Paramount God Realm. By the way, brother, my name is Lu Zhang. Even the Chain Trap Secret Realm, you even reached that secret realm?" Yi Xian frowned slightly. He didn't dare to answer so easily. However, could it be that these people all came from a certain secret realm? Could it be that they weren't from the divine realm? Where is this Chain Trap Secret Realm? Why don't I know about it? Yi Xian changed the topic and asked a question in return. Even if you don't know, our Chain Trap Secret Realm is only a very weak one in the ancient Lost Race Secret Realm Alliance. This time, our entire secret realm only got 3 slots to enter the Origin Secret Realm. Sigh, ever since we lost contact with the Divine Realm, we can only come to the Origin Secret Realm if we want to break through. What do you mean? Yi Xian was a little stunned. Ancient Lost Race Secret Realm Alliance? What kind of organization was that? Also, what did he mean when he said that he had lost contact with the Divine Realm continent? Could it be that these people weren't from the Divine Realm continent at all? However, Yi Xian thought about it and understood that it would be strange if they were from the Divine Realm continent. One had to know that Mi Ming was only a god emperor, but he was a divine master of the Kunlun god domain. If these people were to be placed outside, they would be existences that surpassed Mi Ming or Mi Ming. They couldn't possibly say that they were all divine masters of a god domain, right? If that was the case, no matter how big the Divine Realm continent was, it wouldn't be enough to divide them up. A single Kunlun god domain was the size of 3 million realms, and a single realm was incomparably vast. No matter how big the Divine Realm continent was, it was impossible for it to have hundreds of thousands of divine masters. Moreover, this was only one of the 999 levels. Moreover, there might not be only one city on this level. At this moment, Yi Xian's heart was filled with shock and fear. He suddenly realized that he was nothing here. Moreover, he didn't even have the ability to defend himself. Although Yi Xian's methods were impressive, Yi Xian discovered that his strength wasn't even worth mentioning in the origin grounds. Is he really just a god king? That's impossible. If you want to enter the origin realm, you have to be at least at the god emperor realm. How did a mere first-grade god king like him get in? Something strange. Right, there must be something strange about this guy. There must be something special about him. Could it be that he came from the legendary Divine Realm continent? A few passers-by glanced at Yi Xian when they saw him, but some of them saw through his true strength with a single glance. In an instant, Yi Xian became the focus of everyone's attention. After all, it was extremely strange for a mere first-grade god king to appear in the Origin Realm. And that sentence, that Yi Xian came from the legendary Divine Realm continent, attracted everyone's attention. Yi Xian was helpless. He really wanted to say that this place as well as these people should be described as legends. He didn't expect that he would become an existence of legends. However, facing so many powerful existences, just the aura they emitted was already unbearable for Yi Xian. This wasn't the aura of 1 or 2 experts, but the pressure condensed from the aura of countless experts. However, it was a good thing that although these people were discussing amongst themselves, no one really made a move against Yi Xian. Otherwise, Yi Xian probably wouldn't be able to resist at all. Yi Xian knew that he couldn't stay here any longer. Since he had 6 chances to enter and exit this place at will, then leaving now and raising his strength outside before coming in might be the wisest choice. The mysterious origin realm wasn't something that Yi Xian's current strength was qualified to stay inside. Yi Xian carefully left the crowd, found a deserted place, and activated the teleportation. These 6 teleportations didn't use teleportation talismans or anything else, but were directly bound to Yi Xian. Thus, Yi Xian only needed a thought to activate the teleportation and leave. Perhaps in the eyes of others, advancing from the God King realm to the God Emperor realm would indeed require a lot of time, and it would even be difficult for them to achieve it in their entire lives. However, Yi Xian was different. Therefore, Yi Xian dared to go out. Of course he had to go out. Only after his strength rose to the God Emperor realm would Yi Xian be qualified to enter this place. However, Yi Xian only thought about how powerful the origin realm was, so he wanted to leave. However, he forgot that those 6 experts wouldn't know where Yi Xian came from. It was impossible for them to teleport Yi Xian to the second secret realm. Thus, after Yi Xian was teleported away, he was stunned to discover that he'd once again arrived at an unfamiliar place. Not to mention anything else, Yi Xian knew that this wasn't the Kunlun divine domain. At this moment, Yi Xian was in a wasteland. Yi Xian could tell that this wasteland might have been a bustling place countless years ago, but now there were only weeds, withered trees, and dilapidated walls. Yi Xian looked at the scene in front of him. Although he really wanted to know where this place was, it seemed that the most important thing right now was to be able to leave this place. After all, this was an unknown place, so Yi Xian still maintained a certain level of vigilance. After randomly choosing a direction, Yi Xian directly flew forward. One mountain after another flew past Yi Xian's feet. However, Yi Xian discovered that there were still countless mountains beneath his feet. Finally, Yi Xian saw a building. Without the slightest hesitation, he directly landed. This was because Yi Xian wanted to find someone else to ask where this place was and how to return to the Kunlun divine domain. However, when Yi Xian landed on the ground, he was shocked to discover that this place was actually a gathering place for divine beasts. Who are you? At the same time that Yi Xian landed, a strange divine beast arrived in front of him. Since it could speak the human language, it was obvious that this divine beast was not weak. Chapter 2842. Exterminating All. Who are you guys? Yi Xian coldly asked. He didn't feel the slightest bit of fear because of the other party's numbers. How dare you? Arrogant brat, how dare you be rude to me? Another divine beast appeared in front of Yi Xian. The divine beast transformed into a human and pointed at Yi Xian's nose as it cursed. First, he was looked down upon by a puppet, then he was suspected by the experts in the origin realm. Now, even a mere divine beast dared to point at Yi Xian's nose and speak like this. Wei Zhentian, kill this divine beast for me. Yi Xian frowned slightly as he gave the order. In an instant, Wei Zhentian controlled the god-slaughtering sword and charged towards the divine beast. Puchi! A sword pierced through. Without any suspense, the sword pierced through. This was because although this divine beast could take human form, its strength wasn't very strong. Damned fellow, you actually dared to kill. No, he's a human, he's a spy from the Kunlun divine domain. A divine beast saw through Yi Xian's identity and roared loudly. The moment this human spoke, the surrounding divine beasts immediately pounced over, causing Yi Xian to be slightly stunned. He actually said that he was a spy from the Kunlun divine domain. Then, it was obvious that this was not the Kunlun divine domain. Furthermore, it was a divine domain that was at odds with the Kunlun divine domain. And right now, wasn't the enemy of the Kunlun divine domain the demon god's divine domain? Could it be that he had actually been teleported to the demon god's divine domain? For a moment, Yi Xian was incomparably puzzled. However, when he thought about the uniqueness of the 2 divine halls in the second secret realm, it seemed that teleporting him to the demon god's divine domain wasn't something impossible. Damn it, capture the spy! A divine beast roared. In an instant, all the divine beasts on the mountain pounced towards Yi Xian. Yi Xian wouldn't be polite either. After all, none of the divine beasts here could threaten Yi Xian. Wei Zhentian, magic treasure form. Kill for me. Divine wood sword attendant. It's time for you to make your move. Kill them all. This was the demon god's divine domain. If Yi Xian didn't kill these fellows from the demon god's divine domain, then they would definitely spread the news. At that time, Yi Xian would probably face the pursuit of the entire demon god's divine domain. The demon god's divine domain was an existence that could contend against the Kunlun divine domain. Then, once he was chased by the entire demon god's divine domain, the consequences could be imagined. If that was really the case, Yi Xian definitely wouldn't be able to escape. The 2 god-slaughtering swords quickly rushed out. In an instant, A bloody storm rained down, and the Divine Wood Sword Attendant also showed no mercy. The Divine Wood Sword Attendant's defense was incomparably strong, and its attack power was not weak either. The Divine Wood Sword Attendant waved its hands continuously, and every time it waved, a divine beast would definitely turn into a bloody mist. Regardless of whether it was in human form or in its original form, no divine beast could withstand a single attack from the Divine Wood Sword Attendant. Yi Xian stood on the spot as he looked at the purgatory around him. However, he didn't feel the slightest bit of pity in his heart. After all, these were all divine beasts, and they were divine beasts from the demon god's divine realm. If Yi Xian didn't kill them, then they would kill Yi Xian. Moreover, Yi Xian had also heard that in the demon god's divine realm, humans could be said to be like slaves. They couldn't even be considered slaves. Humans were delicious snacks for these divine beasts. Therefore, Yi Xian naturally wouldn't show any mercy to these divine beasts. In just a short moment, all of the divine beasts on this mountain had been killed by Yi Xian. However, the only thing that made Yi Xian depressed was that the news had still leaked. Yi Xian's movements couldn't be said to be slow, but the number of divine beasts gathered here had reached over 10,000. Thus, Yi Xian didn't have the time to kill them all. In the end, there were still some divine beasts that spread the news. Once this news spread, Yi Xian knew very well what he would face next. A war between a single person and a divine domain. If Yi Xian wanted to live, then he could only walk out of the demon god's divine domain. However, Yi Xian wasn't prepared to leave just like that because Luo Luo was also in the demon god's divine domain. Yi Xian wouldn't give up on searching for her. Since he'd already arrived at the demon god's divine domain, Yi Xian wouldn't mind causing a ruckus. Devour. With a casual wave of Yi Xian's hand, the corpses of the tens of thousands of divine beasts were directly devoured by Yi Xian. Although the strength of these divine beasts was average and couldn't allow Yi Xian to level up, using the method of devouring to deal with the traces of battle was a very good method. Come out, I know you're hiding there. After doing all of this, Yi Xian casually spoke to a large tree. This was because Yi Xian had long since sensed that there was a person hiding within the tree. To be more precise, it was a divine beast. No, don't kill me. I didn't see anything. I promise, I definitely won't say anything. Please don't kill me. Sure enough, after Yi Xian saw through that person's disguise, a half-man, half-beast with a pig's head walked out. As soon as he came out, he directly knelt in front of Yi Xian. You want to live? Yi Xian indifferently asked the half-man, half-pig divine beast. I want to live, I want to live. Please don't kill me. The divine beast frantically knelt in front of Yi Xian and continuously kowtowed. All right, if you want to live, then answer my questions honestly. However, if you hesitate or hide anything, then you can die. Yi Xian looked at the divine beast. When the divine beast nodded, Yi Xian continued to ask, where is this place? Replying to my lord, this is the territory of the Heavenly Dragon King. Heavenly Dragon King? Who is the Heavenly Dragon King? Tell me the details. Yes. Replying to my lord, this Heavenly Dragon King is one of the 8 great divine generals under the Divine Lord. He is a lord under the Dark Demon Dragon Divine General. Including our realm, as well as the surrounding 100 realms, they are all his territory. Lord? Yi Xian was slightly astonished. However, thinking that this was the demon god's divine domain and not the Kunlun divine domain, he didn't think too much about it. After all, every divine domain had its own system and rules. As for this demon god's divine domain, it was a system of enfeoffment. A mere lord of 100 realms territory, this fellow was probably just a small character. After that, Yi Xian asked a few more questions. Unfortunately, this divine beast didn't know much, so it wasn't of any help to Yi Xian at all. Thus, Yi Xian killed him with a single sword strike without hesitation. Heavenly Dragon King? Perhaps, this Heavenly Dragon King knew more things. Yi Xian didn't hesitate and directly walked towards the cave where the Heavenly Dragon King was. Some of the experts of the demon god's divine domain liked to imitate the Kunlun divine domain and build huge cities to live in. However, there were also some who liked to follow their original habits and live in caves, mountains, and even the wilderness. This Heavenly Dragon King lived in a cave. The location was also very easy to find. It was a huge mountain peak. Chapter 2843. Lord Heavenly Dragon King. After all, It was the place where the heavenly Dragon King lived, so there were quite a few divine beasts here. However, Yi Xian wouldn't care that much. The strength of these divine beasts were generally very average. Even the heavenly Dragon King was only the same as Yi Xian, a high-level divine king. Therefore, Yi Xian wasn't afraid of any of the divine beasts here. Who are you? How dare you trespass on the mountain? Do you know that this is Lord Heavenly Dragon King's cave? When a transformed divine beast saw Yi Xian coming over, it directly stood in front of him. With a casual glance, Yi Xian could already tell that this fellow was only a mere third-grade divine lord. Of course, an inferior divine lord would probably be considered an expert under the Heavenly Dragon King. Unfortunately, the one he met was Yi Xian. Thus, he was destined to die. Yi Xian couldn't be bothered to waste his breath. The god-slaughtering sword flew out and killed the divine beast with a single strike. When Yi Xian killed the divine beast, a moment later, the mountain was filled with the sounds of people, and a large group of divine beasts had already come out. After a while, the Heavenly Dragon King directly rushed out. Who dares to cause trouble in my territory? Are you courting death? The moment the Heavenly Dragon King came out, he roared loudly. The deafening sound reverberated throughout the valley. Unfortunately, Yi Xian didn't care about him at all. System, detect the strength of this divine beast. Ding. System notification. Target, Superior Grade 4 God King Realm. Superior Grade 4 God King? Perhaps in this area, he could be called the Overlord. However, if he met Yi Xian, then he could only blame his bad luck. Yi Xian looked at the Heavenly Dragon King and indifferently said, I'll give you two choices. First, listen to me obediently. Then, I can consider sparing your life. Second, if you don't accept it, then I will take your head. The Heavenly Dragon King looked at Yi Xian as his eyes flickered. No matter what, he was the lord of this area. Now that someone dared to speak to him in such a manner, especially after the Heavenly Dragon King saw through Yi Xian's identity and knew his strength, he laughed out loud. Human, it's actually a human. Furthermore, it's a human at the Superior Grade 1 God King realm. Could it be that you're that divine lord from the human clan's resistance army? Haha, I'm dying of laughter. A bunch of ants actually want to try and resist. Furthermore, they even arrogantly call themselves divine lords. Human brat, could it be that you're here to be my snack? Disdain. This was the disdain of the thorns. Even though the Heavenly Dragon King had already seen through Yi Xian's cultivation, he didn't care at all. In the Heavenly Dragon King's eyes, there was only boundless disdain. Indeed, the human clan of the demon god's domain was just a snack for these powerful divine beasts. Now, even if Yi Xian had the cultivation of a superior grade 1 god king, the Heavenly Dragon King had the cultivation of a superior grade 4 god king. He indeed had the qualifications to be arrogant. Of course, the prerequisite was that he didn't meet Yi Xian. The corner of Yi Xian's mouth curled up slightly. He was too lazy to talk nonsense and directly attacked the Heavenly Dragon King. Because to deal with this fellow, only by letting him know his own strength would he understand what it meant to be obedient. Audacious human clan ant, you're courting death. The one who shouted this was not the Heavenly Dragon King, but an expert beside the Heavenly Dragon King. This fellow also had the cultivation of a medium grade 6 god king. However, in the demon god's domain, the human clan had always been bullied. It was impossible for them to obtain any cultivation resources. Naturally, there was no need to even think about cultivation techniques or divine abilities. It could be said that other than a few humans who had great opportunities, the rest of the people did not have any decent divine abilities. Treasures and the like were even more out of the question. This fellow had enough confidence to kill Yi Xian. In his eyes, Yi Xian was just a snack, a food, a human that wasn't even worth mentioning. Unfortunately, Yi Xian was Yi Xian. He wasn't one of the humans that had been bullied for countless years in the demon god's domain. Die! Yi Xian casually pointed. In an instant, a mysterious power was activated. Yi Xian used the 6 syllables incantation. The divine beast that was incomparably arrogant a moment ago died on the spot in the next moment. What? What's going on? In an instant, all the demon gods were astonished. After all, they had never encountered such a situation before. They didn't even consider that it was Yi Xian who killed the medium-grade divine king realm divine beast. In the eyes of these divine beasts, they all felt that the human race was the lowliest race. They were just their food. Could food kill its master? They wouldn't have such a thought. Therefore, these divine beasts didn't know what was going on with the sudden death of the medium-grade divine king realm divine beast. But then they finally found out the reason. Unfortunately, by the time they found out, it was already too late. 6 syllables incantation. Destroy. Yi Xian casually waved his hand, and a mysterious and profound power was activated once again. This time, Yi Xian used the extermination symbol art. Extermination symbol art. Extermination race. This time, Yi Xian used the extermination symbol art against these divine beasts. In an instant, countless divine beasts fell to the ground. Without any warning, he fell to the ground. He didn't even know how he died. This time, over 1,000 divine beasts fell to the ground. They couldn't be any more dead. You, who exactly are you? This time, even a fool could tell that there was something strange about Yi Xian. At the same time, they understood that the death of the medium-grade divine king realm divine beast was caused by Yi Xian. Although they didn't know how Yi Xian did it, it didn't stop them from determining that it was Yi Xian's doing. Damn it, human brat, you're courting death. Kill him. Seeing that Yi Xian didn't return, the heavenly dragon king gave the order and countless divine beasts pounced towards Yi Xian. Even if these divine beasts were weaker than Yi Xian, they weren't afraid at all. In their eyes, Yi Xian was just food. Would Yi Xian show mercy? Impossible. This was the demon god's divine domain. It could be said that Yi Xian was facing a divine domain by himself. If he showed mercy, then he probably wouldn't even know how he died. Moreover, these divine beasts of the demon god's divine domain didn't even see humans as living beings. They only saw them as food and killed them at will. Then, why would Yi Xian care about them? Yi Xian only needed to treat them as resources that he could devour. Mighty heaven shaking, magic treasure form, leave none alive. At the same time that the divine beasts charged over, Yi Xian gave the order to attack. In an instant, Wei Zhentian transformed into a god-slaughtering sword and immediately controlled the 2 god-slaughtering swords to charge out. Of course, Yi Xian himself moved. Eternal Night Domain. Chapter 2844. Capturing the Dragon King. Absolute Zero. The moment Yi Xian made his move, he didn't hold back at all. Absolute Zero smashed towards the slightly stronger divine beasts. Once they were frozen, what awaited them would be the merciless slaughter of the heavens. 1, 2, 3. One by one, the divine beasts of the demon god's domain finally experienced what terror and despair were. In front of Yi Xian, they didn't even have the slightest bit of defense. They could only wait to be killed. At this moment, some of the divine beasts couldn't help but recall how they had surrounded and killed those humans. Wasn't it the same? It was just like now. However, at that time, they had watched the weak humans struggle and then enjoy the feast. And today, they were the ones being hunted down and killed at will. At the very least, they didn't have to endure the cruel words around them. However, the more silent they were, the more terrifying they were. Other than the despairing cries of the divine beasts before they were killed, there were no other sounds. On the mountain top of the space, only miserable screams echoed. Stop, stop right now. The heavenly dragon king couldn't help but shout loudly as he watched his people being continuously killed by Yi Xian. Unfortunately, Yi Xian didn't have the slightest intention of paying attention to him. The heavenly dragon king was enraged and attacked Yi Xian. Unfortunately, it was useless. He didn't even need Yi Xian to make a move. Just the divine wood sword attendant alone was enough to put the heavenly dragon king in danger. If it wasn't for Yi Xian's order not to kill him, the heavenly dragon king would have died countless times. Don't kill me. Help. I don't want to die. I beg of you to spare me. I won't dare to do it again. Countless voices reverberated in the mountains. However, they wouldn't be exchanged for Yi Xian's benevolence, no matter what evil deeds they'd committed. For his own sake, Yi Xian wouldn't let the divine beasts here leave alive. At this moment, Wei Zhentian was controlling the 2 god-slaughtering swords to fly around the surroundings. Any divine beast that tried to escape would be mercilessly killed by Wei Zhentian. Inside, Yi Xian released his god-tier mount, the flower god sword attendant, and continued to kill. Because of the eternal night domain, these divine beasts, who could no longer see anything, could only wait to be slaughtered. The roar became softer and softer until it completely disappeared. The disappearance of the voice meant that all the divine beasts here had been slaughtered. Of course, there was an exception, and that was the Heavenly Dragon King, who was having a hard time fighting against the divine wood sword attendant. At this moment, the Heavenly Dragon King didn't have any fighting spirit left. It could be said that he only wanted to escape from this terrifying human race. However, he couldn't do it at all. In front of Yi Xian, he didn't even have the slightest chance of escaping. Finally, Yi Xian arrived beside the Heavenly Dragon King. At this moment, the Heavenly Dragon King didn't have half of his previous arrogant appearance. When he saw Yi Xian walk over, he hurriedly knelt in front of him. "My lord, spare me. My lord, spare me." He clearly had the cultivation of a high-level 4th-grade god king, but at this moment, the Sky King only dared to kneel on the ground and kowtow as he begged for mercy. The impression that Yi Xian gave the Heavenly Dragon King was too deep, so deep that he would never forget it. That invincible attitude of casually slaughtering millions of divine beasts made this Heavenly Dragon King not have the slightest bit of resistance. "I'll give you another chance. Choose, are you obedient, or let me kill you? In any case, if I kill you, the other divine beasts will definitely cherish this chance to live." "No, no, my lord, I don't want to die, I don't want to die. As long as you let me go, I'll do anything you want me to," the Heavenly Dragon King said loudly. At this moment, he only wanted to live. How could he care so much? Yi Xian nodded his head. In an instant, the divine wood sword attendant returned to Yi Xian's side from the Heavenly Dragon King's side. However, the Heavenly Dragon King didn't dare to have any improper thoughts. He only wanted to escape? He didn't even dare to think about it. This was because the Heavenly Dragon King knew very well that Yi Xian's strength wasn't something he could compare to. Don't think that just because Yi Xian's realm was lower than his, Yi Xian was weaker than him. In reality, just a single divine wood sword attendant was enough to make him unable to resist at all. "Alright, if you want to live, then listen to me obediently." Yi Xian didn't care about this fellow. If it wasn't for the fact that he still had some use for this Heavenly Dragon King, Yi Xian wouldn't mind killing him. "Devour." With a wave of his hand, the divine beast corpses that covered the mountains and plains instantly disappeared. Ding. System notification. Host has broken through. Current realm. 2nd grade high-level God King realm. Yi Xian didn't have the slightest expression. After all, Yi Xian knew that if he didn't reach the God Emperor realm, he wouldn't even have the qualifications to enter the Origin Secret realm. Yi Xian naturally wouldn't waste killing these divine beasts. The current Yi Xian would seize any opportunity to increase his strength. Yi Xian directly walked out with the Heavenly Dragon King. In Yi Xian's eyes, this demon god's domain could be considered a pretty good place. If Yi Xian could kill so many divine beasts, it would undoubtedly provide Yi Xian with quite a bit of cultivation. Quickly raising his cultivation and searching for Luo Luo's whereabouts was the most important thing for Yi Xian right now. As for anything else, Yi Xian couldn't be bothered to think about it. Not long after Yi Xian left with the Heavenly Dragon King, a group of divine beasts arrived. However, when they saw the bloodstains on the mountain, they didn't see any corpses or any survivors. These people retreated in fear. Within a small area of the demon god's domain, a piece of news spread. A powerful spy from the Kunlun divine domain had snuck into the demon god's domain. Moreover, he had killed every beast he saw, leaving no survivors. Even an overlord's territory had been completely wiped out. Of course, there was also another version. It said that the human race, which had always been regarded as a snack by the divine beasts, had actually produced an expert who went around killing divine beasts. But no matter which news it was, it seemed that it was enough to shock and panic the people of the demon god's domain. No one was willing to face Yi Xian, the god of slaughter. However, no one knew where Yi Xian was. There were even quite a few indignant divine beasts that formed teams to kill Yi Xian. Of course, there were also lords who issued orders to capture Yi Xian. However, the next few days were abnormally average, causing people to be unable to understand what Yi Xian was going to do. Actually, what Yi Xian wanted to do now was very simple. It was to head to a genius training camp in the demon god's domain. Just like the Kunlun divine domain, the demon god's domain naturally had an existence similar to an academy. However, in the demon god's domain, it was called a cave. This wasn't the cave that the human race was talking about, but a real cave. Yi Xian was going to a place called the Water Moon Cave. Many geniuses of the demon god's domain were gathered here. Originally, Yi Xian hoped that the Heavenly Dragon King would be able to provide him with information about Lualua's whereabouts or a way to leave the demon god's domain. Unfortunately, the Heavenly Dragon King was only a small character in the demon god's domain. Therefore, he couldn't count on the Heavenly Dragon King at all. It was useless to Yi Xian. Chapter 2845. 2433. Eating humans. The Water Moon Cave was, after all, the place where the geniuses of the demon god's divine realm gathered. Hence, all the people here were divine beasts in human form. When Yi Xian first arrived here, he even suspected that he'd arrived at the territory of the human race. After all, the entire city was filled with all kinds of divine beasts in human form. However, Yi Xian was very clear that this wasn't the territory of the human race. After all, the customs and habits here were completely different. At this moment, Yi Xian walked into a restaurant. Just like the Kunlun divine realm, although many divine beasts didn't need to eat and wouldn't be affected in any way, they were still used to eating something delicious. Yi Xian was prepared to taste the special dishes of the demon god's divine realm. Waiter, what special dishes do you have in your restaurant? Yi Xian asked the waiter. The waiter's strength was not bad. He already had the cultivation of a low-level divine king. At this moment, the waiter looked at Yi Xian happily. After all, anyone who entered the restaurant and asked about the special dishes was undoubtedly an expert, a rich man. Aya, this customer, you really are in luck. Today, I have a few new desserts. I'm sure you'll be satisfied. Oh, tell me about it. What's delicious? Yi Xian was also interested as he asked the waiter. All right, please take a look. This is a human dessert caught from the distant snowy region. The taste is very delicious. Our shop's chef specially chose 10,000-year-old snow lotus velvet, 1,000-year-old ice heart soul spirit, 9,000-year-old divine water returning spirit grass, and has already added, and other divine herbs. Put the fresh twin human babies into the altar, refine them for 49 days, remove all impurities, and then refine them for 99 days with a live fire for 81 days. In this way, not only will the taste be incomparably delicious, but even when you eat it, the two babies will still be alive. All right, sir, please watch. With a wave of his hand, another image of a blade appeared in front of Yi Xian. This time, it wasn't a baby, but a peerlessly beautiful young girl. Customer, look, this is a special ingredient made from human race's top-grade beauties. The main dish of the fairy banquet, the exquisite fairy. Look at how smooth the skin of a human girl is, how tender the meat is, whether it's eaten raw or cooked, it's still delicious. Yi Xian frowned. There were actually two dishes that used humans as the main ingredients. Yi Xian clenched his fists, and the anger in his heart was unbearable. However, Yi Xian was well aware that this was the demon god's domain after all. Thus, even if Yi Xian was angry in his heart, he could only be angry and not say anything. Since I've met you, then it can be considered fate. I only have this much power. If I can save one, then it's one. Yi Xian silently thought in his heart. After all, he had a purpose for coming to the Water Moon Cave, so it wasn't good for him to cause a ruckus. This human beauty is not bad. And those two babies, don't put them in the dish yet. Bring them to me. Yi Xian said to the waiter in an attempt to save the three of them. Hearing Yi Xian's words, the waiter revealed a slightly surprised expression at first, but he didn't think too much about it. However, he awkwardly said, This request of the customer doesn't make sense. These are just two main dishes. Why would the customer have such a request? In the eyes of the waiter, Yi Xian's request was indeed incomparably strange. After all, who would have nothing better to do than look at the appearance of the dishes before eating? The waiter thought for a moment before coming to a realization. Could it be that the customer is afraid that the dishes aren't fresh enough? Rest assured, the dishes in our shop are all freshly caught, so they are guaranteed to be incomparably fresh. Is that so? Could it be that those two babies were also caught by you? Yi Xian's face revealed a displeased expression. This wasn't a pretense. In fact, Yi Xian was already extremely furious in his heart. Aren't you making things difficult for me? These two babies are indeed newly born children of a human that my shop caught. However, this can definitely guarantee their freshness. Enough, if I say I want to see him, then I want to see him. With a bang, Yi Xian directly slapped the table. A table refined from high-grade black iron divine wood was directly smashed into pieces by Yi Xian. When the waiter saw Yi Xian getting angry, he didn't dare to delay any longer. He immediately said, "Sir, please don't be angry. This lowly one will immediately inform the kitchen." The waiter didn't dare to hesitate. After all, the people who came here to eat were either rich or noble. This was a subsidiary city of the Water Moon Cave. No matter what the cultivation level of the young people here was, young Master Shang had an incomparably deep background. He wasn't in existence that a restaurant like this could easily offend. At this moment, seeing Yi Xian get angry, how could he dare to delay? Very quickly, the waiter brought two people in. Each of them was dragging a cage in their hands. In one cage was the young girl, and in the other cage were the two babies. Ding! System notification, detected a special bloodline, goddess bloodline. He didn't expect that the system would give him a notification as soon as the girl arrived. This girl actually had a special bloodline. However, in the demon god's divine domain, no matter what bloodline it would be useless. After all, the human race was only the lowest level of food in the demon god's divine domain. The corner of Yi Xian's mouth slightly raised as he directly asked the waiter, "What's the price of these two dishes?" Seeing Yi Xian ask about the price, the waiter immediately revealed a smile and said, "Dear customer, these two dishes only cost a total of 50,000 spirit stones, which is a very cheap price. If you like it, my shop can even give you a 20% discount. Only 40,000 spirit stones will do." 40,000 spirit stones? A special bloodline, 3 lives, was only worth 40,000 spirit stones. Yi Xian frowned, but there was nothing he could do. With a wave of his hand, a pile of spirit stones appeared in front of the waiter. "All right, count carefully. There are a total of 50,000 spirit stones here. I don't want any discount from you. I want these two dishes. Open the cage, I want to take them away now. Dear customer, although eating it raw is a good choice, after all, the human race is not clean. I'm afraid eating it raw will cause unnecessary problems. Dear customer, why don't you leave it to my shop to deal with it? All right, I don't need you to care what I want to do." Scram! Yi Xian roared as he violently broke open the two cages. Since Yi Xian had already paid, no one would say anything when he broke open the cage. "Follow me," Yi Xian said to the young girl. At the same time, he'd already absorbed the two babies into the devouring space. The young girl hesitated for a moment, but could only follow Yi Xian and leave. After all, he didn't choose to go all out. Even though he knew very well that he had already been treated as food, he could only helplessly accept his fate. This was the helplessness of the human race in the demon god realm. Sometimes, even if they knew what the outcome would be, they were powerless to resist. Chapter 2846. Main course. Very quickly, Yi Xian brought the young girl away from the Water Moon Cave subsidiary city. Actually, Yi Xian knew very well that it wasn't a good idea to have the young girl follow by his side or leave by herself. Of course, Yi Xian could choose to absorb him into the devouring space. However, since he'd come to the demon god's domain, Yi Xian naturally hoped to be able to save more humans. Thus, it might be a good choice for this young girl to stay outside and lead the way for Yi Xian. Those two babies were different. After all, the two babies could be effectively taken care of in the devouring space, so it was useless to leave them outside. However, this young girl was Yi Xian's only guide. Yi Xian released his spiritual will and carefully examined his surroundings. After confirming that there was no danger, he said to the young girl, "All right, we're safe now." However, the young girl still looked at Yi Xian in panic. It was obvious that she thought that Yi Xian was going to eat her or harm him right now. Ouyang Shui was very clear in her heart that once a human girl fell into the hands of a divine beast from the demon god's domain, it could be said that her life was worse than death. In fact, she would even receive treatment that was even more terrifying than becoming a dish. Back then, because Ouyang Shui was naughty, she walked out of the village, but she didn't expect to be captured the moment she came out. Along the way, he had seen many encounters with the human clan. Originally, there were more than 3,000 people imprisoned together with her. But now, he was the only one left. As for the two babies, Ouyang Shui had watched them being born. In reality, The two babies could be considered half human and half beast. Unfortunately, in the demon god's domain, half human and half beast had never been truly recognized. There were even people from the demon god's domain who specially raised a group of human women. Usually, they would be used as tools for the people of the demon god's domain to play with. The babies that they gave birth to would also be immediately sent to the restaurant. Along the way, Ouyang Shui was lucky, but also unlucky. She was lucky because she was small and thin, so no one from the demon god's domain paid attention to her. Unlucky because he had seen too many tragic encounters. What do you want to do to me? Ouyang Shui looked at Yi Xian and asked in fear. Just by looking at Ouyang Shui's expression, Yi Xian already knew that Ouyang Shui had misunderstood. Therefore, Yi Xian lowered his cultivation level as much as possible. At the same time, he revealed a smile and said to Ouyang Shui, "You don't have to be afraid. My name is Yi Xian, and I'm also from the human clan. I came from the Kunlun Divine Domain." Kunlun Divine Domain? Ouyang Shui looked at Yi Xian in confusion. Yes, it's the Kunlun Divine Domain. In the previous Divine Domain War, our human clan's Kunlun Divine Domain won the war. However, I snuck in because of a special mission, so you don't have to be afraid. I'm the same as you, a human. Yi Xian said indifferently. However, who knew that after he finished speaking, Ouyang Shui directly threw herself into Yi Xian's embrace. Tears continuously flowed from her eyes as she sobbed in a low voice. "You're human, you're really a human." "Yes, I'm a human." Yi Xian gently caressed Ouyang Shui's jade back, but he sighed inwardly. He knew why Ouyang Shui was so afraid, because in reality, Ouyang Shui had always been afraid. Among the humans in the demon god's divine domain, which one of them wasn't worried about their own tomorrow? "I know about the Kunlun Divine Domain. Grandma said that it is the holy land of our human clan. Over there, the human clan is the ruler. Yes, the Kunlun Divine Domain is the territory of the human clan. Don't worry, I will definitely bring you away." Yi Xian felt rather helpless in his heart. He'd only heard of the demon god's divine domain before, but he didn't know what it was like. Only now did Yi Xian know that the demon god's divine domain was simply the human clan's purgatory. No wonder the Kunlun Divine Domain and the demon god's divine domain had always been mortal enemies. It was because there was no room for reconciliation. However, it was a pity that the demon god's divine domain was also incomparably powerful. Therefore, even if Mi Ming wanted to save the human clan in the demon god's divine domain, he was unable to do so. After comforting Ouyang Shui for a period of time, she finally calmed down. At the same time, Yi Xian also found out some information about the human clan in the demon god's divine domain from Ouyang Shui. Because the human clan in the demon god's divine domain was suppressed by the divine beasts, they couldn't obtain any cultivation resources at all. Even the space for them to move around was very narrow. Moreover, the divine beasts in the demon god's divine domain would often come out to hunt these human clan. In the demon god's divine domain, there was almost no place for the human clan to hide. Take the village that Ouyang Shui came from, for example. In fact, there had always been a constant migration. In order to avoid the hunting of the divine beasts, Ouyang Shui's village constantly walked through dangerous places, snowy mountains, deserts, abysses. Any place that was hard to be discovered by others was the holy land in their hearts. If they wanted to live, they could only continue to escape. And it wasn't that the human clan didn't have any experts. Unfortunately, without cultivation resources, no matter how talented they were, it was impossible for them to have high achievements. Even if Ouyang Shui was a genius in their village, it was rare for her to cultivate to this nondescript low-class divine lord realm at such a young age with just a fortuitous encounter and without cultivation resources. The reason why Ouyang Shui's divine lord realm was nondescript was because Ouyang Shui's body had been trained to the body refinement realm, but she had almost no combat power. She couldn't even fly. In the demon god's divine domain, the human clan vigorously developed a sub-occupation called construction. This sub-occupation was different from artifact forging. It involved simple processing of materials that could be seen into things that could be used by humans. But no matter what, it was an indisputable fact that the human clan of the demon god's divine domain lived in fear at all times. If the conditions were right, Yi Xian naturally wouldn't mind helping others. Unfortunately, Yi Xian didn't have that ability right now. With her mere cultivation of a high-level god king, he didn't have the qualifications to cause a ruckus in the demon god's divine domain. If he wasn't careful, he might even be discovered by the demon god's divine domain and be hunted down. Fortunately, the divine beasts of the demon god's divine domain usually like to take human form, and the humans of the demon god's divine domain were extremely weak, so they didn't dare to enter the divine beast cities and caves. Therefore, no one suspected Yi Xian. After all, it was impossible for the humans of the demon god's divine domain to reach the cultivation of a high-level god king. Therefore, when they saw Yi Xian's cultivation, the divine beasts of the demon god's divine domain would naturally think that Yi Xian was a divine beast in human form and wouldn't think that Yi Xian was a human. Yi Xian secretly decided that he would save as many humans as he could in the demon god's divine domain. As for the demon god's divine domain, once Yi Xian's strength was sufficient, he would definitely erase this place. Chapter 28:47. Consecutive breakthroughs at the same time, he took out some magic treasures and cultivation resources and gave them to Ouyang Shui. This was the only thing Yi Xian could do. No matter how much more, Yi Xian wouldn't be able to do anything. Suddenly, a thought flashed through Yi Xian's mind. He thought of a skill that he'd almost never used before. Eternal Reward. The Eternal Reward was a skill that came with the eternal body. This skill was originally just a useless existence, but now, Yi Xian discovered that it was time for this skill to show its use. System, can I use the faith point to exchange for eternal points? Ding. System prompt. Host can use faith point to exchange for eternal points. Alright, since I can use faith point to exchange for eternal points. System, use faith point to exchange for an eternal point. I want to use the eternal reward skill. Ding. System prompt. Host has consumed 1 million faith point to exchange for 1 eternal point. Following the system prompt, Yi Xian obtained an eternal point. 1 million faith points to exchange for 1 eternal point didn't seem like a good deal, but Yi Xian couldn't care less. After all, eternal points were very difficult to obtain, but faith points were increasing at any time. Yi Xian naturally wouldn't fuss over it. Yi Xian couldn't even be bothered to see how many faith points he had. Use the skill, Eternal Reward. Use the ancient resources of the ancient zither space as the reward. Yi Xian said directly. Following Yi Xian's words, a powerful light enveloped Yi Xian. The light contained an extremely powerful energy. After all, this was the energy that was exchanged for using ancient resources. The energy continuously condensed and cleansed Ouyang Shui's body. Waves of incomparably pure divine power were directly infused into Ouyang Shui's body. Even the magic treasures that Yi Xian had given Yi Xian had changed. The light condensed and did not dissipate for a long time. Ouyang Shui's eyes were tightly shut, clearly undergoing the test. Yi Xian didn't know what Ouyang Shui had experienced, but the power of the ball of light was clearly able to transform her. Time flowed by. After a full 72 hours, Ouyang Shui finally walked out of the ball of light. In an instant, a powerful fluctuation exploded out from Ouyang Shui's body. This is bad. Yi Xian was shocked. He immediately picked up Ouyang Shui and quickly fled. Yi Xian didn't put Ouyang Shui down until he was 10,000 miles away. At this moment, Ouyang Shui still hadn't completely woken up. However, the system's notification had already sounded out. Ding, system notification, host, please pay attention, the designated target, the special bloodline has been successfully activated. Due to the host's eternal reward, Ouyang Shui's bloodline has been upgraded to the Heavenly Warring Divine Mother bloodline. Ding, system notification, host, please pay attention, Ouyang Shui's realm has increased. Current realm, peak 9th grade Divine Emperor realm. Divine Emperor? And it was even a peak 9th grade Divine Emperor realm? Yi Xian was slightly shocked. He didn't expect Ouyang Shui to advance so many levels in one go because of his eternal reward. One had to know that Yi Xian himself was only a first-grade God King, but he didn't expect that an eternal reward would actually create a peak 9th grade Divine Emperor. This was an entire realm. Moreover, he was only one step away from breaking through. It was impossible for Yi Xian not to be surprised. However, it was also because of this that Yi Xian felt that it was time for him to break through. Although Yi Xian needed to use better resources to continue leveling up due to the increase in his strength, it didn't mean that it would be difficult for Yi Xian. After all, Yi Xian had kept the ancient zither space's output for such a long time without using it. It was time to increase his strength. Otherwise, it would be difficult for him to move an inch in the demon god's domain. Devour. Yi Xian directly said. The countless resources within the universe ring were quickly classified. The valuable ones were kept, and the rest were all transformed into Yi Xian's leveling experience and infused into his body. Breakthrough. 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 Continuous breakthroughs. Ding. System notification. Host has broken through. Current realm. Inferior 9th grade Divine Emperor realm. Yi Xian was very satisfied with raising his cultivation by so many levels in one go. Although he was still slightly inferior to Ouyang Shui, Yi Xian was very clear that if they were to really fight, Ouyang Shui's battle prowess might not be much stronger than his. After all, Yi Xian had raised Ouyang Shui's cultivation level. Coupled with the eruption of Ouyang Shui's special bloodline, this was the result. However, Ouyang Shui didn't have any battle experience, nor did she have any suitable divine abilities. Of course, Yi Xian would slowly settle all of this later. Let's go to the Aquamoon Cave. Yi Xian said to Ouyang Shui. Ouyang Shui was shocked at first, then asked, Big Brother Yi, why are we still going to the Aquamoon Cave? There are many divine beast experts gathered there. It's very dangerous. Yi Xian looked at Ouyang Shui and lightly smiled. Go kill someone. Right, Yi Xian was going to kill someone. In Yi Xian's heart, the demon god's domain wasn't the Kunlun god's domain, so there was no need for Yi Xian to hold back. Since these divine beasts didn't treat humans as living beings, then why would Yi Xian care about them? Let them become the stepping stones for Yi Xian to quickly increase his strength. The two of them walked together, quickly heading towards the subsidiary city of the Aquamoon Cave. This time, Yi Xian didn't have any scruples. Even if he didn't provoke Yi Xian would still make a move to cause trouble, let alone provoke him. The two of them once again arrived at the subsidiary city. At the beginning, they didn't encounter any trouble. However, not long after, Yi Xian found what he wanted. At this moment, Yi Xian was walking on the street, looking at the strange resources that the demon god's domain was selling. After all, there were some resources in the demon god's domain that didn't exist in the Kunlun god's domain. For example, this thing called the 3-star divine stone was something that the Kunlun god's domain had never heard of before. However, this 3-star divine stone had the special effect of strengthening the power of laws. By gathering a sufficient number of 3-star divine stones and refining the 3-star divine power within, one would be able to achieve the special effect of condensing the power of laws. Just as Yi Xian was about to buy some, he heard the roars of people and the neighing of horses in the distance. Get out of the way, get out of the way, all of you get out of the way. The young master of the Yi Karen family has arrived. Yi Karen's family? Yi Xian frowned slightly, but Ouyang Shui had already said to Yi Xian, Big Brother Yi might not know, but this Yi Karen family is a rather powerful family. This Yi Karen family has a divine sovereign level expert, and can be considered to be domineering in this area. Moreover, this Water Moon Cave subsidiary city can be considered to be the property of the Yi Karen family. It sounded like his strength wasn't bad, but Yi Xian didn't care about his background. Chapter 2848. The young master of the Yi Karen family. Brat, are you courting death? Hurry up and scram. Do you know who is here? A lackey ran over to Yi Xian's side. His strength was clearly only at the 6th level of the Divine King realm, but when he saw Yi Xian and Ouyang Shui, the two Divine Emperor realm experts, he didn't have the slightest bit of fear. After all, he represented the young master of the Yi Karen family. Who would dare to disobey him? But today, he just had to meet such a person. Yi Xian couldn't even be bothered to pay attention to this fellow. Since he was looking for trouble, how could Yi Xian be afraid at all? Seeing that Yi Xian wasn't moved, the lackey was clearly infuriated. He casually picked up a whip and lashed it towards Yi Xian. Pa! A crisp sound rang out. Of course, it was naturally impossible for it to hit Yi Xian. Instead, it whipped the shop owner to death. However, it was clear that the Yi Karen family was incomparably tyrannical. Even if their servants killed someone on the spot, not only did no one stop them, they even caused the surrounding people to take a few steps back. When the servant saw that he had killed someone, not only did he not show the slightest bit of fear, he even swaggered over. He glanced at that person and said without a care, "You deserve to die. You dare to block our young master's path? I think you don't want to live anymore." After saying this, the servant waved his whip again and swept it towards Yi Xian. At the same time he said, And you, Humph, you dare to block the young master's path. Kill without mercy. As the whip got closer and closer to Yi Xian, many of the surrounding people revealed expressions of reluctance. Actually, there were naturally some experts here who could defeat this servant, but this was a servant of the Yi Karen family. Moreover, he was the most beloved servant of the Yi Karen family, so no one dared to attack him. Therefore, everyone only thought in their hearts that another fellow was going to die under the whip. However, in the next moment, a scene that shocked them occurred. Just as the whip was about to hit Yi Xian, he heard Yi Xian's voice explode, "Scram!" In an instant, a long sword pounced towards the servant. How could a mere 6th-grade divine king be a match for Yi Xian? Wei Zhentian controlled the god-slaughtering sword and killed him before he could even react. Murder! Moreover, the one who died was a servant of the Yi Karen family. The surrounding divine beasts revealed expressions of shock, and some of them were so scared that they revealed their true forms. They couldn't help but be afraid. This was also a servant of the Karen family. Who would dare to offend the Yi Karen family in the affiliated city of the Water Moon Cave? At this moment, an angry voice rang out. "Damn it, you actually dared to kill my servant. Kill them all." In an instant, a large group of servants charged forward once again and pounced towards Yi Xian. It was obvious that they wanted to kill him. Yi Xian wasn't afraid in the slightest, but his eyes were bright and full of spirit. In fact, Yi Xian already had an idea in his heart. The servants ran amok as they pounced towards Yi Xian, but Yi Xian didn't fight them head-on. Instead, he continuously dodged. Moreover, every time he dodged, he specifically dodged towards a place with a lot of people. These servants of the Yi Karen family were usually unbridled. How could they care so much? They continued to attack without stopping. Boom, boom, boom. Powerful attacks continued to explode, but they didn't affect Yi Xian at all. However, the surrounding passers-by were in deep trouble. In just a short period of time, more than a dozen people had already suffered an unexpected calamity. Perhaps ordinary passers-by could still avoid it, but the divine beasts that lived here or opened shops here couldn't avoid it so easily. A divine beast that opened a weapon shop wailed incomparably. Just a moment ago, the servants of the Yi Karen family had not only injured him, they had also destroyed his shop. Yi Xian purposely acted in an extremely sorry state as he continuously dodged. Those servants didn't care that much and tightly chased after Yi Xian. Along the way, they continuously destroyed and injured passers-by. Yi Xian smiled. This was the result he wanted. Suddenly, Yi Xian made his move. Under the control of Wei Zhentian, the god-slaughtering sword in his hand instantly flew out and killed a servant of the Yi Karen family. Moreover, Ouyang Shui, who was hiding in the shadows, had already received Yi Xian's instructions to kick a divine beast out. Because of the chaos, many people didn't understand the process at all. However, they did see that the divine beast that was watching the show was pouncing on a dead servant of the Yi Karen family. "You dare to kill a member of my Yi Karen family." When a nearby servant saw this result, he immediately roared and was about to rush towards that person. That person was incomparably flustered as he loudly said, "It's not me, it's really not me." However, how could the servants of the Yi Karen family care so much? With a casual whip, they sent that person's head flying. At the same time, they erased that person's divine deity. The corner of Yi Xian's mouth curled into a slight smile as he continued his actions. As he dodged, he created chaos. Moreover, he didn't kill those servants, but only injured them. With Ouyang Shui's cooperation, not long after, there were already passers-by who attacked the servants of the Yi Karen family in order to survive. Damn it! You lowly commoners actually dare to offend this young master's dignity. Kill them all. It was the so-called young master of the Yi Karen family who spoke again. Hearing this, Yi Xian wished that he could ruthlessly praise the young master of the Yi Karen family. This was simply his teammate, not his enemy at all. This kind of cooperation, he had a tacit understanding. Hearing the words of the young master of the Yi Karen family, the servants didn't care so much and directly attacked the people around them. One had to know that their Yi Karen family had always been running rampant in this affiliated city. Killing a few people was something that couldn't be any more normal. After all, compared to the Kunlun God region, the Demon God region valued strength over strength. There weren't as many rules. At this moment, the moment these servants made a move, the divine beasts that were unwilling to be killed would naturally resist. As for Yi Xian, he immediately shouted, "Everyone, what are you waiting for? The Yi Karen family is not giving us a way out. Could it be that you are willing to be slaughtered by them at will? Everyone attack together, for the sake of survival, for the sake of our own lives." Yi Xian's voice naturally resonated with countless people. After all, the current situation was already obvious. The Yi Karen family was already prepared to kill them all. If they didn't resist, then there really wouldn't be a way out. All right, everyone attack together. Even if we die, we can't die in such a cowardly manner. Everyone, resist them together. Someone loudly replied to Yi Xian. With the first, there would naturally be a second. Very soon, the entire street was filled with the sound of voices rising and falling. How could Yi Xian let go of such a good opportunity? If he didn't make a move now, when would he? At this moment, the streets were already in chaos. Chapter 28:49. Back to the Water Moon Cave. The servants of Yi Karen's family had already noticed the abnormality. After all, it was normal for them to kill a few people in this subsidiary city. But now, these lowly commoners actually dared to resist them. This was simply unbearable. However, there were also some smart people who knew that this was not the time to fight. After all, if anything happened to the young lord, they would be able to take responsibility. However, how could it be that easy for them to quell the chaos now? Yi Xian continuously wandered through the crowd. Wei Zhantian controlled the god-slaughtering sword and would occasionally kill a person. The people he killed were all ordinary passers-by who weren't involved in the chaos. One by one, the passers-by were constantly killed. In addition to the chaos in the surroundings, more people were naturally sucked into the vortex. In fact, the Yi Karen family knew very well that they were not welcome in this subsidiary city. Therefore, whenever they went out, they would bring hundreds of guards with them. However, the current situation was that these hundreds of guards were no longer enough. Compared to the chaotic crowd, these guards were like a drop in the bucket. The onslaught of the crowd forced the guards to defend with their lives to prevent the young master from getting hurt. The conflict had already arisen. How could it be so easy to reconcile? Not to mention that Yi Xian was intentionally causing trouble. Ouyang Shui was following Yi Xian's orders to cause chaos, but suddenly, she was pulled to the side by Yi Xian. "Hurry up and leave," Yi Xian said to Ouyang Shui. "Why do we have to leave? The current situation is very advantageous to us. Why don't we assassinate the young master of the Yi Karen family first?" Ouyang Shui's words caused Yi Xian to be slightly stunned. Yi Xian didn't expect Ouyang Shui to be so bold. It wasn't that Yi Xian hadn't thought of assassinating the young master of the Yi Karen family. However, he didn't want to do so. After all, assassinating the young master of the Yi Karen family would definitely bring him a lot of unnecessary trouble. In any case, the current chaos had already achieved the effect that Yi Xian had expected, so there was no need to add more trouble. Yi Xian's plan was actually very simple. He wanted to stir up chaos within the demon realm. Of course, he was only in a subsidiary city of the Water Moon Cave. This time, Yi Xian was only testing his strength. Yi Xian already had a complete plan in his heart. He wanted to make the interior of the demon realm restless. Therefore, there was no need for Yi Xian to suggest assassinating young master Yi Karen. Alright, the current result is already very good. Moreover, even if we don't make a move, I'm afraid that young lord won't be able to survive. The corner of Yi Xian's mouth curled into a smile. This was because he'd already seen that there were already quite a few divine kings and even divine emperors involved in this internal strife. Some people hoped to obtain benefits from helping the Yi Karen family, but even more people could no longer suppress the anger in their hearts and directly attacked the Yi Karen family. This way, it directly led to a chaotic battle between the two forces in this subsidiary city. The people from both sides were already in a killing frenzy. The more they killed, the more people would be drawn into it. It would not be so easy to pacify the chaos in this subsidiary city of the Water Moon abode. Yi Xian brought Ouyang Shui and quickly left. Not long after they left, thousands of family guards, servants, and servants rushed out from the Yi Karen family. These people had received news that the young master was trapped, so they rushed over to support him. Once these people joined in, other than escalating the conflict, it wouldn't be of much use. Not long after Yi Xian left, the entire subsidiary city fell into chaos. Not long after, the young master died at the hands of an expert. Once the young master of the Yi Karen family died, How could the Yi Karen family let this matter rest? Thus, this battle continued for many days without stopping. Of course, it was inevitable that this news would spread. Some people felt that those lowly commoners were courting death by openly rebelling against the powerful Yi Karen family, while others felt that the Yi Karen family had gone too far. But no matter what, Yi Xian's goal of intensifying the conflict had been achieved. 5 days later, a man and a woman once again arrived at the subsidiary city. At this moment, the subsidiary city was clearly much more desolate, and there were far fewer pedestrians on the streets. There were even traces of battles left in many places. These two people were undoubtedly Yi Xian and Ouyang Shui. At this moment, Ouyang Shui had a smile on her face. She was very satisfied with this result. After all, the conflict between the human race and the divine beasts in the demon god's divine realm was simply impossible to reconcile. The human race in the demon god's divine realm naturally hoped that all the divine beasts would die overnight. After all, only then would they be able to obtain a place to live. Although that kind of thinking was almost impossible to achieve, it wouldn't stop Ouyang Shui from being happy from the bottom of her heart because of the riots in the subsidiary cities and the deaths of so many experts from the demon god's divine realm. As for Yi Xian, he didn't feel anything. After all, to Yi Xian, this was only a small part of his plan. Therefore, Yi Xian didn't care about the deaths of these divine beasts at all. No matter how many died, Yi Xian could only watch in silence. This time, it was obvious that the entire subsidiary city had fallen into silence. Because of the great purge of the Yi Karen family, many divine beasts were either killed or chose to leave this place. Yi Xian's arrival wasn't welcomed like before. The people who stayed behind only coldly looked at Yi Xian. Of course, Yi Xian didn't care that much. This time, Yi Xian was just passing by. As a subsidiary city, it was a necessary path to the Water Moon Cave. If it wasn't for this, Yi Xian probably wouldn't have come here. Yi Xian and Ouyang Shui's speed was very fast. Not long after, the two of them passed through the subsidiary city. At this moment, the two of them had already arrived outside the Water Moon Cave. The Water Moon Cave was a place where geniuses gathered. It was one of the more famous caves in the demon god's divine realm. This way, the interrogation would be rather strict. Those who didn't have the qualifications to enter this place would definitely not have the chance to enter. Yi Xian and Ouyang Shui hadn't gone far when they were stopped by the two of them. "Halt, show me your medallions." Yi Xian raised his head and looked at the two of them as he asked, "What medallion?" One of them looked at Yi Xian and indifferently said, "Why did the two of you come here? If you're here to learn, then show your invitation medallion. If you're here to visit, then show your visiting medallion." The corner of Yi Xian's mouth curled up slightly, but he didn't say anything. Instead, Ouyang Shui coldly said, "We're here to kill people. Do we also need to show our killing medallions?" The corner of Yi Xian's mouth twitched. Chapter 2850. Elder blocking the way. Who would have thought that the two guards of the Water Moon Cave would look at each other and laugh out loud? "Haha, you two kids, did you come here on purpose to tease us? Come to my Water Moon Cave to kill people? This is the funniest joke I've ever heard." Was it really a joke? Suddenly, a cold light flashed. The person who was laughing complacently suddenly stopped laughing. There was only fear in his eyes because that cold light had already taken his life. "You, who exactly are you people?" The remaining guard was a sensible person. If Yi Xian could instantly kill his companion, then he could naturally kill him. Therefore, he didn't escape at all because he knew very well that he wouldn't be able to escape. However, Yi Xian didn't pay any attention to that person. As soon as that person finished speaking, Wei Zhentian had already controlled the god-slaughtering sword to fly back and kill him. "I've already told you that we're here to kill people. It's you who didn't believe us. You can't blame us," Ouyang Shui said indifferently. Yi Xian didn't care too much about it. With a casual wave of his hand, he devoured the two divine beast guards along with their universe rings. After doing all of this, Yi Xian and Ouyang Shui continued forward. Along the way, it could be said that they would kill anyone they saw. Although the Water Moon Cave was a gathering place of geniuses in the demon god's domain, how could ordinary guards be a match for Yi Xian? In a short moment, they arrived outside the Water Moon Cave. At this moment, Yi Xian finally met an expert, an elder of the Water Moon Cave. At this moment, just like before, Yi Xian casually killed the two guards. And at this moment, a voice rang out. How dare you? Who are you? How dare you kill people in my watermoon cave? Don't tell me you don't want to live anymore. Along with this voice, 3 figures directly descended. A divine beast with a bull's head and a human's body was holding a magic treasure that looked like a wolf's fang. Behind him were 2 divine beasts dressed in blue robes. This divine beast with the head of a cow was the enforcement elder of the Watermoon Cave. Originally, he was just passing by, but he didn't expect to encounter the scene of Yi Xian killing the guards. The sudden appearance of the 3 people caused Ouyang Shui to be slightly stunned. However, she wasn't afraid at all. Looking at the 3 of them, Ouyang Shui said, Another 3 people have come to die. Along the way, Yi Xian had deliberately trained Ouyang Shui and allowed her to personally kill a few divine beasts with average strength. Of course, most of the time, it was still Yi Xian who personally took action. At this moment when he saw the 3 of them, Yi Xian only asked the system, detect the strength of these 3 people. Ding, system notification, designated target, a 1st grade Divine Emperor Stage Watermoon Cave Elder, 2 7th grade Divine King Stage Watermoon Cave Guards. It could be said that Yi Xian had enough confidence in killing the 3 of them. But this time, Yi Xian didn't move. Instead, he said to Ouyang Shui, Go, I'll leave these 3 to you. No matter what, Ouyang Shui was an expert at the peak of the 9th level of the Divine Emperor stage. It was just that she had just obtained her strength and didn't have enough valuable abilities. But without a doubt, the best way to increase his strength was to fight. That was why Yi Xian had Ouyang Shui make a move. Yi Xian wanted to train Ouyang Shui. Ouyang Shui already had incomparable trust in Yi Xian. She understood that since Yi Xian had asked her to make a move, it naturally meant that he had the ability to kill the 3 of them. Thus, without any hesitation, she directly pulled out her sword and charged forward. This sword was a magic treasure that Yi Xian had given him. It was naturally much weaker than the god-slaughtering sword, but it could still be considered extraordinary. Kill! Ouyang Shui shouted as the divine sword in her hand slashed down. The elder was not afraid at all. With a wave of the mace in his hand, he blocked Ouyang Shui's attack. At the same time, the countless sharp spikes on the mace suddenly burst into a ball of light, instantly covering the entire sky. Those sharp shadows of light, without a moment of hesitation, directly surrounded Ouyang Shui. Wei Zhentian controlled the 2 god-slaughtering swords to surround Yi Xian, but Yi Xian didn't move at all. If Ouyang Shui, with her cultivation at the 9th grade Divine Emperor realm, couldn't even do anything to a 1st grade Divine Emperor realm elder of the Watermoon Cave, then Yi Xian would even consider not nurturing her. At this moment, Ouyang Shui's expression was solemn. The magic treasure in her hand flew up and down, and at the same time, a ray of light lit up from her body. This was the power of law that Ouyang Shui had comprehended. However, even Yi Xian felt a little strange about this law. This power of law wasn't any law that Yi Xian had mastered, and it could even be said to be extremely rare. What Ouyang Shui had mastered was actually the light speed domain law. As the name suggested, the power of this law was the light domain. The speed of light was already considered extremely fast, and the light domain was to bind the power of light within a certain range. Moreover, it could continue to accelerate, even to 100 times, 1,000 times, or even 10,000 times the speed of light. That speed was even faster than teleportation, and even more terrifying than the power of the law of space. After all, the power of the light domain law was different from the power of the law of space, or the power of other laws. This was a special power of law that could maintain peak speed and still be able to fight continuously. As the light of the laws rose, Ouyang Shui's figure turned into a ray of light. Not to mention the naked eye, even the divine sense was unable to detect a mysterious light. At the same time, Ouyang Shui's immature light domain was also activated. The terrifying speed had turned into the most advantageous attack method. Even though the elder's spiritual will was incomparably powerful and could already reach the initial stage of prediction. However, in the blink of an eye, he had already been struck to the ground. Because, in the blink of an eye, Ouyang Shui had already launched over 100 surprise attacks. Of course, at the same time that the elder fell, the other 2 guards had also fallen. Ouyang Shui stopped her things and looked at Yi Xian with watery eyes. Yi Xian naturally understood what she wanted to express. He slightly nodded and indifferently said, Your performance this time is not bad. Thank you, big brother Yi. Ouyang Shui suppressed the excitement in her heart and said excitedly. However, although the speed at which Ouyang Shui killed the elder wasn't slow, it still gave the elder enough time to send out a signal. At this moment, the water moon cave had already received the signal to invade. However, because the time was too short, the elder only had time to send out the invasion signal. He didn't say where it was or who it was. Therefore, in the water moon cave, he could only raise his guard, but he didn't know where the danger came from. Especially when they discovered that the guards had mysteriously disappeared, it made the water moon cave even more vigilant. With a casual wave of Yi Xian's hand, the corpses of the 3 people, along with their universe rings, were devoured by Yi Xian. Ding. System notification. Host has broken through. Current level 1 Divine Emperor. He didn't expect that this elder, who was a mid-level Divine Emperor, would only be able to raise Yi Xian's level by 1. Of course, Yi Xian didn't care about this. He'd already decided in his heart that if he wanted to fight to his heart's content in the demon god's domain, it wouldn't be difficult for him to raise his realm. Chapter 2851. Organizations and Primogenitors. At this moment, a group of god-beast geniuses from the demon god realm were studying as usual. Of course, there were also some people discussing delicacies. It seemed that the experts of the demon god realm pursued delicacies more than the experts of the Kunlun god realm. However, the delicacies in their mouths could never be separated from one word, and that was the human race. In the eyes of the divine beasts of the demon god realm, only the human race was the most delicious food. Such words only made Yi Xian more certain that he didn't do anything wrong in killing the experts of the demon god realm and the heaven realm. At this moment, Yi Xian's figure flashed and appeared in front of a genius from the demon god realm. The god-slaughtering sword suddenly rested on that person's neck without any warning. After all, that genius didn't expect that there would be someone who wanted to kill him in the water moon cave. Answer whatever I say next, but if you hesitate, be careful of your life. Yi Xian said indifferently to that person. That person didn't hesitate at all and nodded repeatedly. Let me ask you, what's going on with the holy son of the demon god realm? Yi Xian knew that Luo Luo seemed to have been treated as some kind of holy son. Of course, there might be other names, but the meaning was similar. The reason why Yi Xian couldn't find Luo Luo's whereabouts was because of her identity as the holy son. Replying to Senior, the holy son is summoned by the ancestor of the demon god realm. Only the genius chosen by the ancestor can be called the holy son and enjoy endless glory. That person didn't know why Yi Xian would suddenly ask such a question. After all, everyone in the demon god realm knew about the holy son. However, since Yi Xian asked, he didn't dare to hide it. A genius chosen by the ancestor? Yi Xian frowned. Actually, Yi Xian had investigated what the holy son was before, but no one seemed to know. Even if they did, there would be different versions. Who would have thought that the answer he got from entering the demon god realm this time would be related to the ancestor? Although Yi Xian didn't know much about the so-called ancestor, it wasn't like he hadn't heard of it. After all, Yi Xian still had some mysterious blood in his hands. Back then, when Yi Xian detonated this blood, he'd heard the people of the demon god realm roar about the return of the ancestor. In short, it seemed that this ancestor was extremely important and mysterious in the demon god realm. Now that he heard the ancestor mentioned again, Yi Xian couldn't help but be puzzled. What is the ancestor? Yi Xian couldn't help but ask. You actually don't know the ancestor. He didn't expect that even though his life was in Yi Xian's hands, the divine beast still dared to ask him a question. However, this fellow immediately realized that he had said the wrong thing, so he quickly added, "The primogenitor is the origin of our monster god celestial realm. According to legend, every divine beast has a powerful primogenitor. The power of the primogenitor is the source of the special race mystique of every race in the monster god celestial realm. All of our race talents are actually bestowed by the primogenitor. Although the ancestor disappeared hundreds of millions of years ago, the ancestor's power is everywhere. Moreover, almost every once in a while, someone will obtain a powerful power through the ancestor's blessing. I heard that someone tried to return the ancestor's power, but I don't know if it's true or not." That person continued to narrate, but Yi Xian thought of another power. Organization extermination. It could be said that Yi Xian had already wiped out the organization from the Kunlun divine domain with lightning speed. However, this didn't mean that the organization had completely disappeared. In fact, there were still remnants of the organization in other divine realms. However, what did the destruction of the organization have to do with the power of the ancestor? On the surface, there seemed to be no relationship between the two. However, Yi Xian had fought with the organization countless times, so he knew in his heart that the organization wasn't that simple. Or rather, the organization wasn't as he had imagined, and it had nothing to do with the power of the ancestor. After all, wasn't the organization also trying to summon some kind of mysterious power? It also had the so-called ancestral return ceremony. Could there be some kind of connection between the two? Yi Xian didn't know. However, Yi Xian knew that regardless of whether it was the organization or the ancestor, he couldn't let them appear. After all, they were incomparably evil. However, if the organization was really summoning the power of the ancestor of the demon god's divine domain, then Yi Xian wouldn't be able to understand it. One had to know that almost all of the members of the organization were humans. Moreover, there was no direct connection between them and the demon god's divine domain. Yi Xian couldn't ignore the fact that the two unrelated forces were thinking about the ancestor's power. However, Yi Xian didn't know anything about the ancestor's power. Moreover, very few people knew about it. Even if they could hear some of it, it would only be a legendary existence. No one could be sure if there was any ancestor's power. Yi Xian put away the doubts in his heart and continued to ask that person, "Where can I find the whereabouts of the Holy Sun?" That person immediately stopped chattering, but said hesitantly, "May I ask, Senior, which Holy Sun are you trying to find?" The total number of Holy Suns had always been a secret. Rumor had it that as long as there was a race of divine beasts in the demon god's divine domain, there would be a Holy Sun. However, the place that every Holy Sun stayed in was not the same. Most of the Holy Suns are secretly protected by their own clans, and a portion of the Holy Suns are controlled by the Lord Divine Lord. There are also a portion of the Holy Suns who have accepted the test of their strength and are constantly wandering around. This kind of answer caused Yi Xian to be extremely dissatisfied. This was because saying it was equivalent to not saying it at all. It wouldn't be of any help to Yi Xian at all. Although this fellow was very cooperative, it was a pity that the information he knew wasn't what Yi Xian wanted. Thus, with a thought from Yi Xian, Wei Zhenqian directly controlled the god-slaughtering sword and killed it without the slightest hesitation. "Come, let's continue forward," Yi Xian said to Ouyang Shui. Soon, the two of them left. Actually, Yi Xian couldn't bear to kill like this because he knew that some divine beasts didn't deserve to die. However, Yi Xian was even more clear that this was the demon god's divine domain, not the Kunlun divine domain. As a human, he was an anomaly in the demon god's divine domain. If he wasn't cruel, then he would only be treated cruelly by the divine beasts of the demon god's divine domain. Either he chose to be casually humiliated by others, or he could only be ruthless. In the demon god's divine domain, at least most of the divine beasts weren't innocent. That was why Yi Xian was so merciless. Right now, Yi Xian was alone. Any mishap might result in his death. If he wanted to live, he had to be vigilant at all times, and he couldn't be merciful at all. Of course, Yi Xian wouldn't hesitate in the slightest to kill these divine beasts, even if they were in human form. Chapter 2852. Follow me if you want to live very quickly. Yi Xian and Ouyang Shui found another target. This time, it was a genius that the divine beast geniuses of the Water Moon Cave called Enchanting. This person's original body was a heaven-listening beast. The heaven-listening beast had a very special divine ability, and that was the heaven-listening divine ability. It was said that the heaven-listening divine ability allowed the heaven-listening beast to hear any sound it wanted to hear, whether it was the sound of millions of years ago or the sound of countless miles away. Even when the divine ability was cultivated to a high realm, it could hear the sound of the future. The heaven-listening beast's heaven-listening ability was extremely strange and unfathomable. However, it also had many restrictions. But no matter what, in Yi Xian's eyes, this heaven-listening beast was undoubtedly a very good choice. Yi Xian believed that this fellow might be able to grasp some secrets that others didn't know about. Then, if Yi Xian didn't look for him, who else would he look for? However, Enchanting was different from the others. He didn't know if it was because he was pretending to be deep or something, but this fellow rarely appeared in front of others. At this moment, Yi Xian wanted to find him, but he didn't know how. However, Yi Xian didn't know that Enchanting had already been taken away by the elders of the Water Moon Cave. It turned out that after the elders of the Water Moon Cave found out that a law enforcement elder had died, they also found out that several guards had died. With so many people dying, it naturally attracted the attention of the elders of the Water Moon Cave. Thus, they found Enchanting and promised him great benefits, hoping that Tianting would be able to use his innate ability to find out who the killer was. "How is it? What did you gain this time?" an elder said to Tianting. At this moment, Tianting was standing in a large formation. This formation was completely made of spirit stones, and every time it was activated, it would require at least 100,000 spirit stones to activate. To maintain it, it would require no less than 1,000,000 spirit stones. With such a huge consumption, it was no wonder that Tianting's innate ability wouldn't be activated so easily. At this moment, the Water Moon Cave was only willing to spend so much money because so many people had died consecutively. In fact, Tianting had already used up tens of millions of spirit stones. Unfortunately, he still hadn't gained anything. When Tianting heard the elder's question, he helplessly shook his head. This time, he still followed the elder's instructions and chose to use the Heaven's Listening ability. However, he didn't hear any useful information. However, he also remembered Yi Xian's voice. Unfortunately, just relying on his voice didn't seem to be of much use. Of course, if Yi Xian knew that Tianting's divine ability was so powerful, he'd probably be glad that he didn't say anything. Otherwise, his identity would have already been exposed. Hearing Tianting's reply, the elders didn't give up. With a wave of their hands, another batch of spirit stones was added to the formation. "It doesn't matter. Continue to investigate. I don't believe that guy didn't leave any clues behind," an elder said to Tianting. Tianting naturally wouldn't refuse. Normally, it wouldn't be so easy to obtain an opportunity to train his divine ability. Now that there was a cave elder willing to spend spirit stones for him to train his divine ability, he naturally wouldn't mind. At this moment, Yi Xian was also searching for Tianting's whereabouts. After another failure, Tianting had already searched all the locations that the elders of the Water Moon Cave knew. Unfortunately, he didn't find anything. He had already spent a total of 20 million spirit stones. This could already be said to have reached the limit of what the elders of the Water Moon Cave could bear. Helplessly, these elders could only give up on relying on Tianting to find clues. Tianting left the elders' place with incomparable doubts in his heart. Just who was it that could make the elders care so much? After all, these elders didn't tell Tianting what had happened. Therefore, Tianting had no way of knowing. However, not long after he walked out, he saw a man and a woman walking towards him. Tianting didn't mind. He thought that it was just an ordinary disciple of the cave. However, when the two of them arrived beside Tianting, they said to him, "You are Tianting?" Tianting was slightly taken aback. He could be considered a famous person in the Water Moon Cave, and almost everyone knew him. Now that these two people had asked him a question, Tianting was a little confused. However, Tianting still subconsciously nodded his head. "Yes, I am Tianting." Following this reply, Tianting suddenly felt an incomparably terrifying aura. At the same time, two powerful divine swords had already locked onto him. All of this happened too quickly, so quickly that Tianting didn't even have time to react. Of course, even if he wanted to react, he probably wouldn't be a match for Yi Xian. After all, Tianting was only talented, but it didn't mean that he was strong. In reality, Tianting was only a mere divine lord. In front of Yi Xian, he didn't even have the slightest chance. "If you want to live, then follow me obediently," Yi Xian said indifferently. At this moment, Tianting seemed to have understood something. Unfortunately, even if he understood, he was powerless to resist. Facing the powerful Yi Xian, Tianting didn't even have the qualifications to speak. The two god-slaughtering swords could break his divine deity at any time, so how could he resist at all? Tianting was incomparably shocked, but he could only helplessly follow Yi Xian forward. Not long after, the three of them arrived at a remote place. Yi Xian casually waved his hand and a divine talisman transformed into a simple formation that enveloped the three of them. The function of this divine talisman was to conceal itself. It could be said that the effect was very simple. However, unless someone deliberately investigated this place, they wouldn't be able to discover anything special about this place. Next, answer whatever I ask you. If I'm satisfied with your answer, I can spare your life. Otherwise, Tianting naturally understood what Yi Xian wanted to say. After all, Tianting already knew of Yi Xian's identity. This fellow was the expert who'd killed all the guards and even the elders along the way, and then infiltrated the water moon cave. Enchanting had the urge to cry in his heart. He never thought that such an expert would actually come looking for him. Of course, he also knew why Yi Xian did this. Actually, it was also because of his divine ability. Yi Xian had also taken a fancy to his special ability. For the first time, Enchanting regretted having this ability. At this moment, it was originally worth showing off. The innate ability that countless people envied had brought him great trouble. Let me ask you, how much do you know about the Holy Sun? Yi Xian indifferently asked. At the same time, a powerful pressure was emitted from his body, causing Enchanting to not dare to hide anything. Enchanting quickly started to answer, but he didn't let Yi Xian get much of what he wanted. However, Yi Xian knew that Enchanting wasn't lying. After all, what Enchanting had heard was exactly what Yi Xian knew before. Chapter 2853. The Dharma idol opened again this time. The question caused Enchanting to hesitate slightly. It wasn't that Enchanting wanted to hide anything, but the answer seemed to be something that everyone knew. Of course, Enchanting did not dare to hesitate as he replied right away. The only way to enter the Master God battlefield is through the teleportation tokens bestowed by the Divine Masters and the Heavenly Kings. After all, the moment the Master God battlefield closes, that place will become a forbidden zone. As for the Kunlun God region, I have heard of some secret passageways that can be used to enter. However, after the previous war with the Kunlun God region, those secret passageways have been sealed as well. So there's no other way. Yi Xian frowned slightly. That day he thought that Yi Xian was angry, so he quickly continued, No, it's not like there's no chance at all. This lowly one once heard that in the 8 great divine general palaces, each of them has a special secret realm. That secret realm leads to both the Kunlun divine realm and the demon god divine realm. Yi Xian frowned once again. What's the use of this? Don't tell me you want me to kill those divine generals and snatch the two-way secret realm? Enchanting was at a loss for words. He hurriedly tried to say something. However, Yi Xian waved his hand, indicating that he didn't need to say anything else. This was because the information provided by Enchanting didn't seem to be really useful. Of course, knowing that there were 8 two-way secret realms was not bad. Perhaps he could give it a try in the future. Yi Xian looked at the Heaven Listener Beast. The Heaven Listener Beast's innate ability wasn't bad, so it could be used by Yi Xian. It would be a pity to kill it just like that. With a casual wave of his hand, he directly absorbed the Heaven Listener Beast into the devouring space. After all, once it entered the devouring space, the Heaven Listener Beast would be completely under Yi Xian's control. From then on, it wouldn't be able to go against Yi Xian's wishes. Who said that Yi Xian knew in his heart that the Heaven Listener Beast wouldn't be of much use for a short period of time after being absorbed into the devouring space. However, as the Tree of Law grew, the devouring space would gradually become stronger. It might be useful in the future. Unexpectedly, even the Heaven Listener Beast didn't have too many clues. Yi Xian shook his head in disappointment. His gaze quickly gathered on the surrounding divine beasts. These divine beasts were all geniuses of the demon god's domain. Perhaps in the future, they would become the enemies of the Kunlun divine domain and Yi Xian. Thus, at this moment, Yi Xian hardened his heart and prepared to kill them all. Rather than keeping these geniuses of the demon god's domain as enemies in the future, it was better to kill them all now. That's right, Yi Xian wanted to kill everyone because he knew very well that sooner or later, the people here would become enemies of the Kunlun divine domain and Yi Xian himself. Moreover, even if Yi Xian didn't make a move, Ouyang Shui probably wouldn't let these people off. It could be said that there were almost none of these geniuses who hadn't eaten humans before. In the eyes of these so-called geniuses of the demon god's domain, humans were just food. Then, what reason did Yi Xian have to give them a chance to live? Wei Zhentian, magic treasure form, kill for me. Following Yi Xian's order, Wei Zhentian instantly moved and directly controlled the 2 god-slaughtering swords to charge out. At the same time, Ouyang Shui also charged out. Ever since the establishment of the Water Moon Cave, this was the first time it had encountered a bloodbath. Another meaning of a genius was that one's strength was insufficient. The reason why they were called geniuses was because their potential was very high, but it didn't mean that they were very strong. Perhaps in the future, they would all be able to become experts, but at least for now, they didn't have that kind of strength, and Yi Xian wouldn't give them the time to grow. The god-slaughtering sword danced continuously, and one genius after another fell. Within the entire Water Moon Cave, Wails could be heard incessantly. One by one, the divine beast geniuses transformed into their true forms in an attempt to resist or escape. Unfortunately, it was useless. Yi Xian and Ouyang Shui were like two gods of death as they slaughtered their way through. 1, 2, 3. Yi Xian couldn't be bothered to remember how many divine beast geniuses he'd killed because there was no need. In any case, as long as an enemy appeared in his field of vision, not a single one of them would escape. However, this kind of devastation didn't last long. During this period of time, the elders of the Water Moon Cave had never stopped searching for Yi Xian and Ouyang Shui. Now that the two of them had appeared, they naturally attracted the attacks of the elders. "Brat, how dare you be so impudent in my Water Moon Cave? You're courting death." An elder quickly charged towards Yi Xian. His body continuously emitted a powerful light, and as he charged towards Yi Xian, he'd already activated his innate ability. It could be said that he was the pride of the porcupine race. After all, the porcupine's talent was generally low, and it was rare for them to be able to cultivate to the divine emperor realm. And this divine beast expert was an inferior 7th grade deity emperor. Unfortunately, a mere inferior 7th grade deity emperor was nothing in front of Yi Xian. Even Yi Xian couldn't be bothered to recall the god-slaughtering sword. He merely casually punched out, and a powerful force instantly exploded out. Boom! With a single punch, Yi Xian sent the porcupine elder flying with just a single punch. However, this punch didn't take the porcupine elder's life. The porcupine elder was sent flying by Yi Xian's punch, and his heart was filled with fear. He stood in the distance, continuously coughing up blood, and didn't dare to move forward. However, at this moment, the other two elders had already arrived. The two of them first glanced at the porcupine elder, then looked at each other, and rushed towards Yi Xian. Ding! System prompt. Target is a middle 4th grade deity emperor. Host is advised to dodge immediately. 3 levels higher than Yi Xian? He was indeed very strong, but don't think that Yi Xian's title of Eternal Sovereign was just for show. It was only 3 levels higher, but Yi Xian still didn't put it in his eyes. The two elders transformed into their original forms, because the two of them were the kind of divine beasts that could only display their greatest combat strength in their original forms. These two elders were actually a tiger and a lion. Roar! 2 furious roars rang out, and these two powerful divine beasts had already launched their attacks. A tiger's roar and lion's roar came from the very beginning. A violent sound wave instantly exploded, forming a huge whirlwind that charged towards Yi Xian. However, Yi Xian didn't place this kind of attack in his eyes. With a casual wave of his hand, a powerful force was unleashed, directly dispersing the whirlwind. However, the two great divine beast elders had already attacked once again. After the two of them transformed into their original forms, they didn't use any magic treasures, because their original forms had long since been trained to surpass most magic treasures. Even if they casually waved their hands, there would be a huge flash of claw light that wasn't any weaker than the light of an ordinary magic treasure. Yi Xian's eyes narrowed. He clasped his hands together and immediately activated a Dharma idol. Glorious Empress Dharma idol. The Glorious Empress was once an expert of the God Realm continent. The few great abilities she was proficient in could be said to be unsolvable. Chapter 2854. The Glorious Empress. The second divine power was called the Glorious Glory. It was a divine power that used the law of light's power to condense a gigantic singularity and unleash an explosive attack. This divine power could cause great damage within a certain range within a short period of time. Combined with the first divine power, it could naturally cause great damage to the enemy. Apart from these two divine powers, the third divine power was undoubtedly even more terrifying. The third divine power was called the Glorious Annihilation. Once this divine power was activated, the target that was locked on would be continuously injured by the gigantic light pillar that descended from the sky as long as it was under the light. These divine powers of the body of 10,000 venerables were difficult to obtain and had a long cooldown period. However, there was no doubt that the explosive damage was extremely terrifying. At this moment, Yi Xian summoned the Glorious Empress Dharma idol. The moment it appeared, a terrifying pressure descended. The two elders were slightly astonished, but they didn't give up on attacking. Instead, they continued to pounce towards Yi Xian. As the two elders charged forward, they actually fused together and activated their combined ability, the Tiger Lion Berserk Demon. The Tiger-Lion Berserk Demon was a fusion skill that the two elders had perfected over tens of thousands of years of tacit understanding. It could be said that once the two of them activated this sacred art, it would be equivalent to perfectly fusing their strength together. The explosive attack power was not as simple as 1+1. Wherever the two of them ran, the clouds would disperse. Because their speed was too fast, there was actually an extremely powerful tornado protecting their bodies. Unfortunately, even so, it was useless. Dance for me. A smile hung on the corner of Yi Xian's mouth. With a casual wave of his hand, the dance of glory divine ability immediately descended. The two elders were stunned to discover that their bodies had involuntarily stopped. They were even pulled by some mysterious power of the law, causing them to dance on the spot. Although this period of time was very short, it was enough to make them panic because Yi Xian's new attack had already arrived. Glory of glory. A huge ball of light surrounded the two of them, and then the ball of light quickly shrank. Yi Xian looked at the ball of light and lightly said, "Bam!" At the same time Yi Xian spoke, the ball of light had already condensed to its limit. With a loud bang, it directly exploded. Boom! With a loud sound, the constantly condensing light energy exploded in an instant. The powerful force directly wrapped around the two elders. After the explosion, the two elders were already covered in blood and had no choice but to fall to the ground. At the same time that he landed, Yi Xian didn't plan on letting them go. Glorious annihilation. A ray of light descended from the sky. The two elders had previously stood together because they had used the fusion divine ability, but now, they had become the root of their deaths. In an instant, even the elders felt as if their bodies were melting. As a matter of fact, their bodies were indeed melting. The power of the law of light, no matter how tough your body was, as long as it wasn't truly unbreakable, then it could be refined. This glorious annihilation borrowed the laws of light, but it used artifact forging to kill the enemy. In other words, the glorious annihilation used the enemies in the light as materials to refine. Of course, this refinement would never have any results, because the final result would be to be melted. What a terrifying scene! Two powerful elders of the Watermoon Cave had actually melted in front of everyone's eyes. At this moment, the surrounding elders didn't dare to make a move. They all looked at Yi Xian in fear. One of them loudly asked Yi Xian, "Who exactly are you? What grudge do you have with my Watermoon Cave?" My Watermoon Cave is a public cave built in response to the orders of the Divine Lord. Any genius can enter to cultivate and stand aloof from worldly affairs. Why are you looking for trouble with my Watermoon Cave? Yi Xian silently shook his head. Perhaps in this demon god's divine domain, your Watermoon Cave is aloof from worldly affairs. Unfortunately, the divine beast geniuses you've nurtured will sooner or later appear in the main god battlefield and become enemies with the Kunlun divine domain. Then, it's impossible for Yi Xian to let them go. Yi Xian didn't pay any attention to the elders. With a casual wave of his hand, he directly devoured the universe rings left behind by the tiger and lion elders. Yi Xian's calmness made the surrounding elders unable to make up their minds. After all, no one knew what kind of trump card Yi Xian had. As for Ouyang Shui, relying on her high cultivation, although she didn't have Yi Xian's powerful methods, she'd still killed several elders of the demon god's divine domain. The two of them had already killed countless divine beast geniuses. What exactly do you want? Why are you making an enemy out of my Watermoon Cave? If my Watermoon Cave is in the wrong, then we are willing to compensate you for your losses. Please stop immediately. Another elder spoke. This elder's original body was a dark Qilin, so there was a constant flow of black gas around him. Yi Xian indifferently looked at these people, but he didn't really intend to let go. Of course, Yi Xian knew in his heart that once all of these elders attacked, even Yi Xian wouldn't be able to hold on. Moreover, the cave master of the Watermoon Cave and the other experts hadn't appeared yet. Once they appeared, Yi Xian probably wouldn't be a match for them at all. Yi Xian understood the principle of stopping while he was ahead. However, if he didn't ruthlessly extort the Watermoon Cave, then it would be a waste. All right, I can stop. However, the disciples of your Watermoon Cave devoured my clansmen. How are we going to settle this? Yi Xian's words weren't fake at all. Weren't humans treated as food by these divine beasts? However, Yi Xian didn't say that he was a human. After all, if he said that he was a human, it would only cause those elders to attack him crazily. Hearing Yi Xian's words, The elders seemed to understand something, but it was obvious that they had misunderstood. In the demon god celestial territory, it was very normal for many powerful races to treat the weaker races as food. However, the prerequisite for this was strength. If one's strength wasn't enough, then they would be eaten by others instead. That would be their own misfortune. At this moment, those elders had clearly misunderstood Yi Xian's intentions. They thought that one of Yi Xian's clansmen had been killed and devoured by a disciple of the Water Moon Cave, so they'd come to take revenge. So that's how it is. However, you are being a little unreasonable. Which clan disciple of my Water Moon Cave did such a thing? You can find trouble with his clan. Why are you targeting my entire Water Moon Cave? Oh, is that so? Then those disciples said that they were disciples of the Water Moon Cave and no one dared to hurt them. How do you explain this? In any case, it was all nonsense. Yi Xian didn't care that much. What? There's actually such a thing. Hearing Yi Xian's reply, the elders were obviously a little angry. At this moment, a red figure descended from the sky. Greetings, Grand Elder. So it was the Grand Elder of the Water Moon Cave who had arrived. Ding. System prompt. Target. High 7th grade Divine Emperor. Suggest host dodge immediately. Chapter 2855. Deterrence. It could be said that it was impossible for Yi Xian to resist. Yi Xian was inwardly vigilant. He'd already decided that if the Great Elder made a move, he'd immediately flee. However, the Great Elder's next words caused Yi Xian to stop in his tracks. Since it's the fault of my Water Moon Cave's disciple, then this compensation must be given. Brat, the resources in this universe ring can be considered your compensation. With a wave of his hand, he actually gave Yi Xian a universe ring. Yi Xian was puzzled. Why was this guy so easy to talk to? No, I'm afraid things aren't that simple. Sure enough, at this moment the Great Elder spoke again. Brat, your 10-tailed divine fox clan lives in seclusion in the unworldly secret realm. When did you actually walk into the continent? 10-tailed divine fox? Suddenly, Yi Xian thought of the glorious Empress main body. It turned out that the glorious Empress main body was actually a 10-tailed divine fox. The Great Elder had clearly misunderstood and thought that he was from the 10-tailed divine fox clan. After all, Yi Xian had used the abilities of the 3 glorious empresses in succession, which was also the innate ability of the 10-tailed divine fox clan. Yi Xian understood this point and the corner of his mouth slightly curled up. Who cares about the 10-tailed divine fox? Yi Xian doesn't care that much. As long as he gets the benefits, that's enough. Let's go. Yi Xian casually waved his hand and ignored the Great Elder with Ouyang Shui. It was obvious that the Great Elder was extremely afraid of the 10-tailed divine fox clan. Seeing Yi Xian and Ouyang Shui calmly leave, some of the ordinary elders didn't understand the Great Elder's actions and asked, Great Elder, could it be that we're just going to let the 2 of them leave? They've killed so many of our disciples. Once the clansmen of those disciples pursue the matter, how are we going to deal with them? The Great Elder turned his head to look at the elder and said indifferently, Tell them if anyone has any objections, they can go directly to the 10-tailed divine fox clan to interrogate them, as long as they have the guts. Great Elder, I wonder what's so special about that 10-tailed divine fox? Why are you so afraid? Humph, Lord Divine Lord's original body is really a 10-tailed divine fox. Tell me, if Lord Divine Lord finds out that his clansmen were devoured by our Water Moon Heavenly Abode disciples, what do you think the consequences will be? Don't pretend that I don't know that your clansmen were also killed by this person, but let me tell you the truth. Pray that this person will not cause trouble for you, otherwise, the day of your clan's annihilation will not be far. What? Almost all the Water Moon sect elders paled in shock. Very few people knew what the true body of a demon god's sacred realm's divine lord was, but they didn't expect that this Great Elder would actually know. If this was really the case, then forget about using resources to exchange for safety. They would even be willing to hand over the resources of their entire clan. All the elders almost immediately went to find the juniors of their clansmen and began to teach them a lesson. This was because they knew very well that if this matter was not handled properly, it would be a calamity that would lead to the annihilation of their clan. Challenging the Lord God's original race was no different from courting death. Of course, Yi Xian didn't know that he'd accidentally impersonated the main body of the demon god domain's divine lord. At this moment, Yi Xian had already opened the universe ring that the Great Elder had given him. However, when he saw the resources within the universe ring, Yi Xian was overjoyed. Originally, he had only followed the steps down and left because the Great Elder had given him a way out. However, he didn't expect that the Great Elder would actually compensate him, and it was such a generous one at that. It could be said that the resources within the universe ring that the Great Elder had given him were dozens of times more than all of the resources on Yi Xian's body. Of course, this was half of the Water Moon Cave's inventory, so the amount was naturally quite a bit. System. Categorize the resources. Leave behind the resources that are useful to me, and devour the rest. Following Yi Xian's order, the system directly categorized them. Very quickly, there were already results. Amongst the thousands of resources, only a dozen or so were determined by the system to be useful to Yi Xian in the future. The rest were directly devoured by Yi Xian. Ding! System notification. Host has broken through. Current 3rd grade Divine Emperor. 2 realms in a row. Yi Xian was extremely satisfied with this result. As expected, he still had to rob in order to obtain more resources and more benefits. After Yi Xian left the Watermoon Cave, he brought Ouyang Shui along with him. After all, although Yi Xian wasn't afraid of the Watermoon Cave, it didn't mean that he didn't understand the difference in strength. It had to be known that not to mention the Cave Master, even the Great Elder wasn't a match for Yi Xian. Thus, Yi Xian prepared to loot other places. This time, Yi Xian's goal was to find those holy suns. Yi Xian wanted to see how different these holy suns were from the demon god's domain. Yi Xian's first target was the Hopeless Mountain that was closest to the Watermoon Cave. In the Hopeless Mountain, there was a holy sun in the divine crocodile race. Yi Xian's intention was very simple. He wanted to meet the holy son of the divine crocodile race. According to what he heard from the heavens, the holy son of the divine crocodile race was also a middle-level divine emperor stage expert. His strength was comparable to Yi Xian's, so Yi Xian wanted to see what kind of heaven-defying methods this holy son had. Actually, how could Yi Xian not want to leave this place as soon as possible? However, with all the passageways sealed, it seemed like the only thing he could count on was the dual-path secret realm that the 8 great divine generals controlled. However, how could the 8 great divine generals be so easy to deal with? Therefore, if Yi Xian wanted to return to the Kunlun divine domain, it could be said that he didn't have the strength to do so. Moreover, in the demon god's domain, Yi Xian's cultivation speed would undoubtedly be much faster. After all, in the demon god's domain, Yi Xian could kill these divine beasts without fear and quickly increase his strength. After all, Yi Xian clearly remembered the 10,000 years of the contract with the 2 great halls. Yi Xian also remembered the power of that mysterious secret realm very clearly. Therefore, the only way to increase his level was to increase his level quickly. 3 things. The first was to find Luo Luo's whereabouts. The second was to return to the Kunlun divine domain. The third was to increase his speed quickly, and then go to the mysterious secret realm to train. These were the 3 most important things in Yi Xian's heart. That was why Yi Xian went to look for other holy suns. After all, looking for other holy suns would allow him to complete these 3 tasks at the same time. If he was looking for a holy sun, then it would be possible for him to find out Luo Luo's whereabouts through the other holy suns. Even if one didn't work, there would be 10 or 100 of them. There would always be one who knew of Luo Luo's existence. And killing a holy sun would undoubtedly be able to quickly raise his cultivation and strengthen himself. That way, he would be able to enter the mysterious secret realm trial even faster. At the same time, every holy sun had a lot of resources in his hands. Perhaps he could also find a way to head to the Kunlun divine domain. Therefore, the holy sun was Yi Xian's best choice right now. Chapter 2856. Poor human clan Mount Hopeless was a ruin left behind by the excavation of a spiritual stone mine. However, after thousands of years of changes, divine trees and divine flowers grew here again. At the same time, some changes were triggered, turning the ruins into a flourishing holy land. The divine crocodile clan was not originally a divine beast here. However, when they discovered the natural spiritual pool here, they did not go far. They forcibly dispersed the surrounding divine beasts and occupied Mount Hopeless. The divine crocodile clan spent most of their time cultivating in the spiritual pool. Only a portion of the guards stayed to guard the surroundings. After all, when they occupied Mount Hopeless, they had killed many people, so they had to be on guard at all times. Even now, the divine crocodile clan did not dare to let their guard down. At this moment, Yi Xian and Ouyang Shui were walking along Mount Hopeless. Unexpectedly, Ouyang Shui actually thought of something. Big brother Yi, I remember this place. In the ruins of Mount Hopeless, there is a human clan village. I came here when I was young, and this village is one of the few human clan villages that can settle down in one place. Human clan village? Ever since he arrived at the demon god's domain, Yi Xian had mostly heard about how the human clan was bullied, but in reality, he hadn't seen much of the human clan. Since there was such an opportunity, Yi Xian naturally didn't want to let it go. All right, let's go to this village first. As Yi Xian nodded in agreement, the two of them quickly walked forward with Ouyang Shui leading the way. This place was originally just a ruin, so it was naturally not that easy to pass through. The ruins of a spirit stone mine were different from the ruins of an ordinary mine. Because a spirit stone vein was a special substance formed by the heavens and earth, it was naturally blessed by the laws. Even though the spirit stones in the vein had long since been dug out, the laws still existed. Almost every digger of a spirit stone vein knew of a legend, and that was that even if the ruins of a spirit stone vein were completely dug out, it wouldn't be long before a new mother lode would be formed, and a new spirit stone vein would be born. What was a mother lode? That was a treasure that countless people could only dream of. Anyone who obtained it would be able to use it greatly. There were two main characteristics of a mother lode. The first was that it would automatically gather the divine power of the world and produce all kinds of minerals. In fact, everyone knew this even without saying. The most important thing was his second characteristic. This characteristic could be said to be known by very few people. That was the blessing of the laws. Those who possessed the mother lode would be able to obtain a special blessing when cultivating the laws. Of course, it was extremely difficult to obtain the mother lode. Even if it was a mine, it might not necessarily give birth to a mother lode. That thing was something that could only be found by chance. Now that Yi Xian had arrived at the ruins of the mine, he naturally held some expectations. System, activate all detection and try to find the mother lode as much as possible. Yi Xian instructed the system. Then the two of them continued forward. Unfortunately, it was just like the legends. It was extremely difficult to obtain a mother lode. Along the way, Yi Xian didn't receive any notifications from the system. In other words, he didn't discover a mother lode. However, just as Yi Xian was about to give up, the system's notification rang out. Ding, system notification, host, please pay attention, traces of mother lode have been detected ahead. There really was a mother lode. It could be said that this was an unexpected surprise. What's up ahead? Yi Xian asked Ouyang Shui. Ouyang Shui glanced at Yi Xian in astonishment, then said, "That village is in front of us." The reason why Ouyang Shui was surprised was because she thought that Yi Xian had already discovered something special about this place. However, she didn't know that Yi Xian had only detected the existence of the mother lode. When Yi Xian heard Ouyang Shui's reply, he didn't say much and continued forward. After walking for a while, the two of them discovered a cave, and that cave was the entrance. The strangest thing was that outside the cave, there was actually the power of the laws. These laws seemed to have formed a door, cleverly hiding the cave. In other words, unless one saw it with the naked eye, one would not be able to discover it with their spiritual will. As a matter of fact, for powerhouses, they would usually trust their own divine sense more than their own eyes. Therefore, even if a divine beast expert passed by this place, if they didn't have any spiritual will and didn't notice anything unusual, they naturally wouldn't check it out. Furthermore, the cave was extremely hidden. Even if someone came down to search, it would be difficult for them to detect anything special. No wonder the human village was able to hide in this cave for so long. All of this was because of the hidden door constructed by the laws. At this moment, Yi Xian had some understanding in his heart. He was afraid that the Gate of Laws had a certain connection with the Mother Or. Perhaps it was very likely that the Mother Or was the true guardian of this village. The two of them carefully walked towards the cave. According to Ouyang Shui, the people in the village had set up countless traps in the cave. Although these traps and mechanisms wouldn't threaten Yi Xian, after all, the people in the village had set up these traps with great difficulty. Yi Xian didn't want to destroy them like this. After all, these were all set up by the people of the village to prevent divine beasts from barging in. Fortunately, Ouyang Shui was quite familiar with this place. Coupled with Yi Xian's powerful spiritual will, they were able to escape unscathed. Very quickly, the two of them arrived at the interior of the cave. Yi Xian could already clearly see the faint flames. "Who is it? Who are you people?" Suddenly, a loud roar rang out. Soon after, a few humans rushed out. They held simple spears in their hands. These spears were not magic treasures, but were made from some kind of vine. One could imagine how powerful they were. But this was their only weapon. "We are humans, don't worry," Ouyang Shui hurriedly said. As expected, when they heard that it was a human, those people weren't that afraid. However, they didn't relax their vigilance in the slightest. Only after Yi Xian and Ouyang Shui walked out did those people recognize their identities as humans. "You are Xiao Shui?" An older person looked at Ouyang Shui and asked in surprise. "Yes, I am Ouyang Shui. Hello, Uncle Lin." Meeting an acquaintance undoubtedly made these people very happy. The human race lived in fear in the demon god's celestial realm. Take this village for example. Many people had never left the demon god's celestial realm in their entire lives, and most of those who left never returned. Yi Xian and Ouyang Shui were received in a grand manner. It could be said that this village had already taken out their best things to receive Yi Xian. Chapter 2857. Mistaking the mother lode. The first was a moss-like plant that grew in the cave. It tasted very bitter, but it was the favorite of the people here, because this kind of food was very common. The second was a type of white bug that grew in the cave. The smell was extremely unpleasant and disgusting, but it was the delicacy of the human race in the cave. This was because this was the only meat they could eat. As for the third type, it was a type of ore. This ore had very special characteristics and could be used as food in front of it. It could be said that the living environment here was extremely harsh. At this moment, Yi Xian's heart was extremely bitter. After all, these people were all of Yi Xian's race, and they were all humans. However, he didn't expect that they'd live such a life. In the middle of the cave, there was a hole that couldn't be considered too big. However, that hole had gone through more than 10 twists and turns. After being turned a few times by the people in the cave using a crystal mirror, the sunlight shone into the bottom of the cave, and this was the only place where the human race in the cave came into contact with the sunlight. Fortunately, this was the god realm, and the 10 suns in the sky alternated, so the sunlight here could be considered abundant. Unfortunately, because there were only hard stones in the cave and no soil, it was impossible to grow any plants. Of course, there was no way to keep any divine beasts in captivity. Yi Xian silently watched all of this. In front of him, there was a stone house. This was the only house in the cave. There was no one living in this house. Instead, there was a stone that was worshipped. It was the mother lode. The mother lode was worshipped as a guardian deity here. Yi Xian no longer had any thoughts of obtaining the mother lode. At the same time, he also had the thought of migrating the people here. Therefore, just as these people were happily asking Ouyang Shui about the situation outside, Yi Xian put forward his own thoughts. "I want to take you out of here. Are you willing?" Yi Xian asked these people without the slightest hesitation. Ouyang Shui was stunned at first, but then her face revealed an ecstatic expression. From this period of contact, Ouyang Shui knew how powerful Yi Xian was the most. Yi Xian had countless secrets on him, and at the same time, he also had an extremely powerful foundation. At this moment, Yi Xian's initiative to move the people in the village was undoubtedly the best outcome. Thus, without waiting for their reply, Ouyang Shui excitedly persuaded them. Yi Xian silently waited. He could put forward his thoughts, but the choice was up to these people. After all, Yi Xian wouldn't force them. Very quickly, the people in the village made their decision. In the demon god's divine realm, the human race was exceptionally united. This was because everyone knew very well what kind of environment they were in. If they wanted to survive from the mouths of those powerful demonic beasts, they could only rely on the unity of the human race. Therefore, when they heard Ouyang Shui's advice, no one doubted it at all. After all, they had long heard of the power of the Kunlun divine realm. In their hearts, the Kunlun divine realm was a holy land. Now that they had such an opportunity, even if they knew that it would be extremely dangerous, they were still willing to give it a try. However, they misunderstood Yi Xian. Yi Xian wanted to bring them to a safer and more comfortable place. That was Yi Xian's devouring space. This time, in order to be able to accept more people from the demon god's divine realm in the future, Yi Xian had specially remodeled an area. Here, Yi Xian had built many palaces and circled out all sorts of delicious food. Furthermore, He had hoarded a large amount of cultivation resources in order to provide these people with as perfect an environment as possible to survive and cultivate in. In reality, Yi Xian had also noticed something special about this place. That was, everyone here had astonishing talent and potential. Perhaps, those who did not have the talent had already been eliminated. Of the remaining people, 9 out of 10 could be said to be considered geniuses in the Kunlun divine realm. Of course, it didn't mean that Yi Xian didn't have any selfish motives. After all, after Yi Xian allowed these people to cultivate to become stronger, they would be able to be used by him. Within the devouring space, due to the constant transformation of the 12 laws god trees, the cultivation environment was getting better and better. Therefore, Yi Xian believed that these people would definitely like that place. In fact, these people didn't just like it. In their hearts, this place was like a holy land. It was even more perfect than the Holy Land. After resolving the problem of settling the village, Yi Xian began to consider how to deal with the divine crocodile clan. From these people's mouths, Yi Xian already knew that this village was actually built under the divine crocodile clan's spirit pool. The divine crocodile clan naturally allowed other divine beasts to inspect their spirit pool. This could be considered as indirectly protecting this place. After all, the power of the spirit pool originated from the mysterious mother lode. Therefore, it was inevitable that Yi Xian would touch the interests of the divine crocodile clan if he wanted to take away the mother lode. Moreover, it was the most core benefit. After all, taking away the mother lode meant that Yi Xian wanted to take away the source of the divine crocodile clan's spirit pool's power. Therefore, after Yi Xian absorbed these humans into his devouring space, he didn't dare to rashly make a move. Yi Xian wasn't afraid of fighting against an entire clan by himself, but he knew that this wasn't a wise choice. After all, Yi Xian didn't know what kind of experts the divine crocodile clan had. At this moment, Ouyang Shui quietly stood beside Yi Xian. Ouyang Shui didn't know how precious the mother lode was, so she was slightly puzzled when she saw Yi Xian standing there in a daze. "Big brother Yi, is there anything else?" Ouyang Shui asked Yi Xian. In Ouyang Shui's heart, there was no doubt that Yi Xian was powerful, and his methods were heaven-defying. Therefore, Ouyang Shui didn't know why Yi Xian stopped where he was. Yi Xian was currently thinking, so he didn't think too much about it. He casually replied, "I'm thinking, how can I take down this mother lode?" As he spoke, Yi Xian casually pointed at the mother lode. Who knew that Ouyang Shui didn't know how powerful it was? When she saw Yi Xian point at the mother lode, she actually flew over and casually took it down. "Big brother Yi wants this." Ouyang Shui blinked her eyes as she quietly asked Yi Xian. As for Yi Xian, he was incomparably astonished. Why did you take it down?" At this moment, Yi Xian could already feel that the energy that had been pouring into the sky had disappeared. This couldn't allow Yi Xian to not be shocked. It could be said that the expert of the divine crocodile clan definitely knew the secret of this spirit pool. The reason why he didn't make a move to snatch it was not because of any other reason. He was just worried that taking away the mother lode would affect the spirit pool. And now, once the power of the spirit pool disappeared, even the experts of the divine crocodile clan, no matter how stupid they were, would know that something strange had happened beneath the spirit pool. How could Yi Xian dare to delay? He grabbed Ouyang Shui and wanted to leave. Chapter 2858. Evolving God-Slaying Sword. Previous chapter. Next chapter. Boom. Previous chapter. Next chapter. Boom. Previous chapter. Next chapter. Boom. Continuous explosions suddenly sounded out. One by one, the experts of the divine crocodile clan descended to the bottom of the lake. These experts clearly cared more about the mother lode than Yi Xian imagined, because the moment they appeared, they completely surrounded Yi Xian. In other words, Yi Xian's every move was under the surveillance of the divine crocodile clan. The reason why they didn't make any movements was because they didn't place the human village beneath the spirit pool in their eyes. Even so, they didn't care about Yi Xian at all. Now that Yi Xian had boldly taken away the mother lode, it had undoubtedly touched the core interests of the divine crocodile clan. They had no choice but to take action. "Damn it, how dare you take away the saint's stone? You're courting death." An expert of the divine crocodile clan roared at great god Yi Xian. Of course they recognized the mother lode. However, this mother lode was clearly a little special. Otherwise, they wouldn't have called it the saint's stone. 9. A total of 9 powerful divine crocodile clan experts completely surrounded Yi Xian and Ouyang Shui. Through the system, Yi Xian knew that even the weakest amongst these people had reached the third-grade Divine Emperor realm. As for the strongest person, he was actually a sixth-grade Divine Emperor realm expert. It could be said that Yi Xian was completely powerless to resist. This could be considered the greatest danger Yi Xian had encountered. What should he do? Yi Xian quickly pondered in his heart. 9 Divine Crocodile Clan experts had surrounded Yi Xian. If he were to make a move now, he'd simply be courting death. It seemed impossible for him to escape. In an instant, Yi Xian quickly thought of his trump card. Unfortunately, it was useless. The current Yi Xian didn't have a single trump card that could contend against the 9 great Divine Crocodile Clan experts. Once he made a move, he would undoubtedly die. After all, other than the 6th grade Divine Emperor, there were also 2 intermediate-level Divine Emperor experts. The title of the Sovereign level allowed Yi Xian to be invincible among those of the same level, and even be able to challenge those of a higher level than him in a one-on-one battle. However, this didn't mean that Yi Xian could fight against 3 high-level Divine Emperor experts. Battle, defeat, escape. There was no way to escape. Of course, it wasn't impossible to release the sword attendants to fight, but don't forget, this was the territory of the Divine Crocodile Clan, and Yi Xian didn't believe that these 9 people were all the experts of the Divine Crocodile Clan. To put it bluntly, these 9 people were just a group of guards for the Divine Crocodile Clan. Ouyang Shui, don't resist. I'll send you away. If you stay here, you'll only drag me down. At this moment, Yi Xian couldn't care less. Originally, Yi Xian didn't intend to absorb Ouyang Shui into the devouring space, but with the current situation, he had no choice but to do so. Thus, Yi Xian casually absorbed Ouyang Shui into the devouring space. Just as Yi Xian said, without Ouyang Shui here, Yi Xian's actions had a lot less to worry about. At the same time, the Mother O was already in Yi Xian's hands. At that moment, the system's notification rang out. Ding. System prompt, detected special resource, Sacred Heart or Mother. Yi Xian still hadn't noticed it. The system prompt was quickly thinking of a countermeasure in his heart. However, the God-slaughtering sword reacted on its own. This was a situation that Yi Xian had never encountered since obtaining the God-slaughtering sword. One had to know that the God-slaughtering sword currently had Wei Zhentian as its artifact spirit, but even Wei Zhentian was unable to control the God-slaughtering sword. Sure enough, in the blink of an eye, the change had already begun. From the sky, 9 gorgeous pillars of light suddenly appeared. What was even stranger about those 9 pillars of light was that once they reached the surroundings of the God-slaughtering sword, they quickly condensed. Absorb. It was absorption. The God-slaughtering sword was actually rapidly absorbing the power of the 9 rays of light. Even though Yi Xian didn't know what kind of power those 9 rays of light represented, he knew that it wasn't a simple matter. Previous chapter, next chapter, boom! Another loud sound rang out as an incomparably powerful Divine Crocodile race expert descended. Just his aura alone was enough to make Yi Xian's hair stand on end. Stop him. We can't let him take away the power of the profound light. The moment that expert appeared, he roared loudly. As for the 9 Divine Crocodile race experts, they didn't hesitate at all as they pounced towards Yi Xian. Yi Xian was overwhelmed with shock. Not to mention the 9 of them, even if 2 or 3 of them joined forces, it would still be difficult for Yi Xian to deal with them. At this moment, Yi Xian was even prepared to enter the devouring space at any time to temporarily escape. However, the next scene caused Yi Xian to stop in his tracks. At the same time, he was incomparably shocked. Although the 9 of them pounced towards Yi Xian, they weren't even able to get close to him before they were blocked by a strange energy. It was invisible and colorless. Whether it was the naked eye or spiritual will, it was impossible to detect it in the slightest. However, the effect was obvious. At this moment, the 9 of them were blocked outside, unable to enter at all. Yi Xian could clearly hear their furious roars, and he could also clearly feel their attacks. However, even their attacks in themselves were unable to enter the range of that ring. Yi Xian didn't understand why, but he knew that he was temporarily safe. At this moment, the face of the Divine Crocodile race expert was filled with regret. This was because only he knew that the mother lode was not an ordinary mother lode, and he also knew that this mother lode was special. There were countless treasures in the world, and there were naturally many treasures that could be used to refine and strengthen magic treasures. Some treasures might look ordinary on the outside, but they were extremely powerful. Some treasures, on the other hand, were hidden among the treasures. Those who didn't know what was good for them would never discover them. This mother lode was such a special mother lode. The most important thing about this mother lode was not its material itself, but its special attribute. This mother lode could be used as a guide to guide the power of the profound light down to refine magic treasures. Just like what was being done to the god's slaughtering sword. A magic treasure refined by the profound light was definitely not ordinary. A magic treasure refined in this way could be greatly strengthened in all aspects, and its quality would also be improved. Therefore, such a treasure could be said to be a good thing that could only be found by chance and not sought after. At this moment, the supreme expert was filled with regret. If it wasn't for the fact that he had eyes but failed to recognize this mother lode, how could he have missed it? One had to know that this kind of treasure usually only had one special ability. Thus, after Yi Xian used it, this originally incomparably mystical treasure had been crippled. Back then, although the divine crocodile race had discovered that the mother lode could gather mysterious energy in the spirit pool, they hadn't thought too much about it. They had mistakenly thought that the spirit pool was special, but who would have thought that the mystery would be revealed and this would be the result? Not only did they not obtain such a precious treasure, the spirit pool had also been destroyed. How could the divine crocodile race accept this? Chapter 28:59. It became a treasure since they couldn't obtain the mother lode. The super experts of the divine crocodile race decided to take away the god's slaughtering sword. The mysterious power continued to pour into the god's slaughtering sword, causing it to undergo a huge change. On the outside, experts from the divine crocodile race continuously surged over, surrounding Yi Xian. Inside, Yi Xian could only silently look at the god's slaughtering sword and wait. Of course, Yi Xian was constantly thinking of countermeasures. The current situation was already very obvious. The divine crocodile race was determined to obtain the mother lode and the god's slaughtering sword. Once the light dissipated and the evolution ended, the battle would begin. The divine wood sword attendant had already been released by Yi Xian. After all, the divine wood sword attendant possessed an incomparably powerful defensive power. Perhaps, relying on this powerful defensive power would give Yi Xian a chance of survival. To be more precise, Yi Xian wouldn't let go of any methods. However, anything that could help Yi Xian right now, Yi Xian would do. Time passed. He originally thought that this evolution wouldn't last long, but the reality wasn't like that. At this moment, a full 7 days had passed, and the light still hadn't dissipated. Even if he wanted to block the 9 pillars of light that seemed to reach the heavens, he wouldn't be able to do anything. So finally, a new divine beast rushed over. After all, under that powerful light, anyone would feel that a rare treasure had been born. Naturally, those who saw this light would not let go of the chance to seize the treasure. Haha, this old man wants to see what kind of good thing has appeared to cause such a huge commotion. At this moment, another expert arrived, and a thunderous voice exploded from afar. It's the old man of the Divine Valley Dragon Mountain. Didn't he go on a trip? Why is he back so soon? Someone discussed in a low voice. It was obvious that this old man of the Divine Valley was quite famous. Moments later, Yi Xian saw an old man with an old face, 4 arms, and 6 legs covered in fish scales walk out. Every step the old man took caused the ground to shake like an earthquake. Following his footsteps, the experts of the Divine Crocodile clan continuously opened up a path. Obviously, even the many experts of the Divine Crocodile clan did not dare to block the path of the old man of the Divine Valley. What is it that has such a powerful light? Mine, it's all mine. Haha, it's all mine. Another voice sounded. Along with this voice, an exquisite palanquin carried by 4 lower 9th grade divine emperors who had transformed into beautiful women flew over. The palanquin had yet to arrive, but the sound had already spread to every corner. A rare treasure has appeared. It looks like there will be another bloody storm. How sad. A bald man with 6 strange snake tails suddenly appeared. His words seemed to be filled with sorrow, but it was unknown why he was sad. One expert after another appeared. The Divine Crocodile clan, who was originally the host, was forced to stay in a corner. Because the Divine Crocodile clan knew very well that these experts were not to be trifled with. Some people gathered together, looking around with flickering eyes, waiting silently. Some people looked around arrogantly, as if they wanted to stir up trouble. Some people just quietly looked for a place, not bothering to hear or ask. Experts kept coming here. Yi Xian did not know whether to laugh or cry, because he suddenly realized that he had become the target of these people. In the past, Yi Xian often participated in treasure hunting and snatching. But to become a treasure himself, to become the object of others to fight over, this was a novel experience. Of course, as the number of experts increased, Yi Xian felt more at ease. After all, generally speaking, as long as it was a treasure hunt, there would inevitably be a bloody battle. Moreover, if the winner of the treasure hunt was not decided, then no one would be able to snatch the treasure away. Currently, countless experts had gathered, and every single one of them was eyeing Yi Xian covetously. Naturally, Yi Xian was safe. Because no matter who made the first move against Yi Xian, they would undoubtedly be surrounded and attacked by the others. Thus, Yi Xian had the chance to fish in troubled waters. Of course, it didn't mean that Yi Xian was already safe. In the current situation, Yi Xian had only obtained an opportunity. Whether or not he could grasp it and successfully leave was still unknown. The light lasted for 13 days. In these 13 days, the powerful light completely surrounded Yi Xian and the god-slaughtering sword, protecting them from the attacks of the surrounding divine beasts. 13 days of time was enough for countless experts to arrive. At this moment, there were already hundreds of experts gathered around Yi Xian. Of course, there were also tens of thousands of people. The outer perimeter had already been divided into 3 layers. The first layer consisted of the hundreds of experts, each occupying a position. No one moved. Of course, there were also people who knew each other and grouped together. Following that, a race like the divine crocodile race gathered. Because it was a race, it had a large number of people and extraordinary strength. As for the outermost area, they were the divine beasts that came alone but were not strong enough. These divine beasts knew that they didn't have the qualifications to participate in the treasure hunt, but they weren't willing to leave so easily. Thus, they gathered in the surroundings and silently watched the situation change. It seemed that he was also trying to fish in troubled waters. The light disappeared, but the evolution of the god-slaughtering sword didn't end immediately. The god-slaughtering sword hung high above Yi Xian's head, emitting wave after wave of powerful energy. The outer barrier became stronger and stronger, and it was no longer just a strong defense. When the divine beast experts saw the light receding, they thought that they had a chance and rushed forward. However, not only were they unable to break through the barrier, they were even repelled by the barrier, causing them to be severely injured and flee in panic. No one knew why the barrier was so strong, but everyone knew that unless the barrier dissipated on its own, it would be impossible to break through. Originally, Yi Xian thought that the evolution of the god-slaughtering sword had nothing to do with him. But this time he was wrong. Wei Zhentian was still unable to enter the god-slaughtering sword, but the god-slaughtering sword hung high above Yi Xian's head. Waves of mysterious energy continuously poured into Yi Xian's body. This power was extremely destructive, but Yi Xian was unable to resist at all. Sword body purification. It was actually a sword body purification. Those who knew their stuff turned pale with fright, and their expressions were filled with envy. The purification of the sword body referred to the strange phenomenon of the psychic divine sword feeding back to its master. The divine sword was psychic, and when it gathered enough power and developed a strong feeling for its master, it would use its own power to cleanse its master's body. This kind of cleansing could be said to be extremely rare. Not only did it require an extremely high quality of the divine sword, it also required an extremely powerful support. In addition, the divine sword itself had an extremely strong feeling for its master. And the last point was the most difficult thing. This was the divine sword itself, not the artifact spirit of the divine sword. In fact, to be able to do this meant that the divine sword already possessed intelligence. Chapter 2860. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. However, there was nothing wrong with this place at all. There was nothing at all. They did not notice anything strange. Yi Xian was surprised by this. However, now was not the time to argue about this. System, break the restriction here. Ding. Restriction has been successfully broken. In everyone's eyes, Yi Xian had just walked to a corner and stood there in a daze for a while. Then, he stretched out his hand and waved it casually. In an instant, a bridge made of seaweed appeared in front of them. There really is a restriction here. Everyone looked at Yi Xian in a different light. Yi Xian was able to discover this restriction and break it, but they weren't able to discover it. What did this mean? Did this mean that Yi Xian was a restriction master? In an instant, everyone was terrified of Yi Xian's mysteriousness. Yes, it was terrifying. What was Yi Xian's identity? Why were there so many mysteries surrounding him? Of course, now was not the time to talk about this. After Yi Xian broke the restriction, everyone stopped hesitating and walked forward. However, just as Yi Xian was about to pass by, he heard the spiritual deity speak. Pavilion Protector Elder, please wait here for a moment. Since this restriction has recovered after you left last time, it is very likely that this restriction has the ability to repair itself. In order to prevent the people behind from not being able to find this small bridge, Pavilion Protector Elder, please stay and lead the way for the others. It could be said that the spiritual deity's cultivation level was much higher than Yi Xian's. However, Yi Xian's status was much higher than his. Naturally, he could only treat Yi Xian as an equal. Yi Xian nodded. The spiritual deity's words made sense. Thus, Yi Xian did not follow them. The rest of the group was only half a day late. During this time, Yi Xian did not know what they were doing. Of course, Yi Xian was too lazy to care. Fortunately, the barrier had not been repaired yet. Thus, the group of people continued to walk forward together. However, what Yi Xian did not expect was that when they entered, they only saw a few broken corpses. The dozens of people in the vanguard were all dead. No, there was still one person who was still fighting. It was the inferior spiritual deity. Quick, save him. In an instant, several powerhouses rushed over and fought with the demonized mermen. Soon, the inferior spiritual deity was saved. What's going on? Someone quickly asked the inferior spiritual deity. The inferior spiritual god glanced at the crowd and said, "This is when I led the vanguard group when we arrived." What do you mean? Speak clearly. What is this? I don't know what it means. I only know that the voice said that it had been waiting for us for a long time. Then, those mermen started to attack us crazily. Although the average strength of these demonized monsters is not very strong, they have some special magical powers. Among them, the most important thing for you to pay attention to is that these demonized monsters can be resurrected indefinitely. What? Resurrected indefinitely? This time, everyone, including Yi Xian, was stunned. Resurrection. Some people did have such special magical powers. But what was the point of being resurrected indefinitely? Let's not care about that for now. Kill. We must find out the secret of this place first. Everyone did not hesitate and directly charged forward. Yi Xian was also about to charge forward, but the inferior spiritual deity of Lingxian Court suddenly stopped Yi Xian. What do you want? Yi Xian looked at the inferior spiritual deity, not knowing what he wanted to do. Pavilion Guardian Elder. Leave this place quickly. Don't hesitate and leave immediately. This is not a place we can provoke. Furthermore, a pair of eyes have been watching us. Therefore, I can only ask everyone to charge forward together. However, the others can die, but you can't. What did he mean? Yi Xian was somewhat unable to react. This fellow had not clearly explained what was going on. He had only asked Yi Xian to leave quickly. It was not impossible to ask Yi Xian to leave, but he should at least explain things clearly. However, the inferior spiritual deity did not continue speaking. Instead, he suddenly struck out with his palm at Yi Xian. Of course, he did not want to hurt Yi Xian. In fact, his palm was directly pushing Yi Xian away at an extremely fast speed. What are you trying to do? Yi Xian looked at that person and retreated rapidly. However, he continued to ask. However, a giant black hand that suddenly appeared answered Yi Xian's question. That hand had stretched out from under the island. As soon as it appeared, it locked onto Yi Xian, who was about to leave. Damn it! What the hell is this? Yi Xian was greatly alarmed. The current situation had already exceeded his expectations. He had been sent flying the first time he had come. He still had to flee the second time. What the hell was this? Damn it, damn it. This feeling made Yi Xian extremely unhappy. The inferior spirit god suddenly jumped up and used all of his strength to block the attack for Yi Xian as he loudly shouted, "Senior spirit god!" He then shouted, "Hurry up and leave." Yi Xian did not know why this fellow had done this. However, when he looked at the island one last time before he left, he already knew that he was the only one who would be able to escape this time. Yi Xian's last glance caused his heart to tremble in fear, to the point of incomparable panic. Then, what exactly did Yi Xian see? It turned out that the last thing Yi Xian saw was numerous extremely enormous black hands. These enormous hands were unimaginably strong, and they could capture a person with a casual grab. It could be said that no one in the heavenly god realm could resist them. However, merely 5 domain enlightened spirit gods had come this time. Obviously, they weren't of any use at all. How could this be possible? How could this be possible? What exactly happened? Yi Xian was extremely astounded in his heart. He didn't hesitate at all and directly returned to the training camp. At this moment, no one in the training camp was too worried about the exploration of Ripple Lake. Or perhaps, in their opinion, this was a battle that they were absolutely confident in. However, when they saw Yi Xian return with a panicked expression, they clearly revealed different expressions. The pavilion master of Towering Pavilion quickly walked over to Yi Xian. Actually, if it wasn't for the sudden appearance of those demonized monsters, then perhaps he wouldn't be willing to meet Yi Xian at all. Grandmaster Yi, what happened? Why did you return by yourself? Where are the others? He addressed Yi Xian as Grandmaster Yi. This was naturally for the sake of concealing Yi Xian's identity. They won't be able to return. Yi Xian spoke. At the same time, he gazed at the others. The Domain Enlightened Spirit God Realm. Chapter 2861. The way to survive at this moment. Although Yi Xian was on high alert, he didn't pay too much attention to it. In fact, he subconsciously didn't think that there would be an enemy attack. However, in that instant, a faint, almost imperceptible movement suddenly erupted. It was fortunate that Yi Xian's spiritual will had been strengthened once again, and the location of the mutation just so happened to be not far from Yi Xian, so he had time to react. However, even so, the only thing Yi Xian could do was slightly shift his position. Boom! A loud sound rang out. At this moment, Yi Xian realized that what attacked him was a red ray of light. It was as thin as a gossamer, yet extremely powerful. The divine wood sword attendant immediately stood in front of Yi Xian, blocking the majority of the damage for him. But even so, Yi Xian was still sent flying by the force. The violent force instantly sent Yi Xian flying high into the sky. However, there was someone waiting for Yi Xian in the sky. This was a person with a pair of wings. To be precise, it was a divine beast, but Yi Xian didn't know what race he was. When Yi Xian was sent flying into the sky, a large net exploded from that person's hands in an attempt to trap him. The power of the law of devouring. Yi Xian was shocked. He already knew this person's goal. This guy was probably the one who used the red light. Sending Yi Xian flying into the sky was also part of his plan. His goal was to quickly capture Yi Xian. Ding! Designated target. High 6th grade Divine Emperor Realm. Another high-level Divine Emperor Realm. Although at this moment in this area, the 6th grade Superior Deity Emperor was actually not that strong, for Yi Xian, he was still a formidable enemy. It could be said that if they really fought, Yi Xian didn't have much of a chance of winning. Unfortunately, this guy used the power of the law of devouring, so don't blame Yi Xian for breaking his web of laws. Playing with the law of devouring in front of Yi Xian, let alone a mere high-level divine emperor, even a hierarch or a god emperor might not be able to win against Yi Xian. After all, Yi Xian's greatest trump card was the power of devouring. At this moment, that person swore confidently, thinking that victory was already in his grasp. He even had a smile on his face, waiting for Yi Xian to fall into his web of laws. However, Yi Xian fell into it, but it wasn't the result that person imagined. The flickering web of laws had already surrounded Yi Xian. Unfortunately, it didn't listen to that person's call and returned to his side. At this moment, that person finally noticed that something was wrong. He frowned slightly and wanted to retreat, but he couldn't bear to leave. After all, he knew that if he didn't leave, he would attract the attention of others. At that time, he wouldn't be able to leave even if he wanted to. However, seeing that Yi Xian had already fallen into his web of laws, he naturally couldn't bear to leave so easily. However, he didn't know that although Yi Xian was trapped in the web of the law of devouring, he wasn't affected in the slightest. On the contrary, the web of the law of devouring had already been completely controlled by Yi Xian. How dare you? That person only hesitated for a moment, but there were already experts who noticed the changes here. With a roar, 5 people immediately attacked this side at the same time. Another explosion sounded out. A moment ago, he was still complacent, thinking that he'd successfully trapped Yi Xian and had a chance to escape. In the next moment, he was killed by 5 experts and turned into a mist of blood. As soon as that person died, Yi Xian controlled the web of laws to fall to the ground. On the surface, it seemed that it was because the web of laws was no longer under the control of its master that it fell. However, no one knew that all of this was secretly controlled by Yi Xian. The 5 experts glanced at Yi Xian, who was trapped by the web of laws. Unexpectedly, no one tried to snatch it from him. Instead, they silently retreated and continued their battle. In Yi Xian's heart, the actions of these divine beasts could be said to be extremely stupid. Of course, if these divine beasts weren't stupid, then he, Yi Xian, wouldn't have a chance of survival. At this moment, with Yi Xian as the center, there were battles everywhere. Divine beasts continuously fell, as if the goal of these divine beasts wasn't to snatch treasures, but purely to fight. The web of law was slowly losing its strength. It wouldn't be long before it completely disappeared. However, Yi Xian didn't mind at all. Yi Xian silently looked around, but he had an idea in his heart. The crazed slaughter of these divine beasts was also an opportunity for Yi Xian to increase his strength. No matter what, if he could become more powerful, then he would have a higher chance of escaping. Therefore, without the divine beasts noticing, the corpses of divine beasts were constantly disappearing from the battlefield. Some were entire corpses, while others were only missing arms and legs. Of course, the whereabouts of these corpses were obvious. They were naturally devoured by Yi Xian. Ding! Host has broken through. Current 4th grade Divine Emperor Realm. Ding! Host has broken through. Current 5th grade Divine Emperor Realm. As Yi Xian continued to devour the corpses of the divine beasts, his realm continued to rise. At the beginning, Yi Xian's movements were extremely careful. After all, he was worried that he would be discovered and attract unnecessary trouble. However, who knew that even if someone discovered Yi Xian's movements, they wouldn't care at all. Thus, Yi Xian became bolder. Of course, even so, the number of corpses that Yi Xian could devour was limited. After all, Yi Xian was currently trapped in one place, so it was impossible for him to collect those corpses. Thus, he could only pick up the corpses nearby. Fortunately, even though the corpses nearby were incomplete, they all belonged to experts. Thus, Yi Xian obtained great benefits from collecting these corpses. In a short period of time, Yi Xian was able to break through to the 1st grade Divine Emperor realm just by devouring the corpses. However, this kind of collection couldn't continue because Yi Xian knew that although these divine beasts ignored him in the chaotic battle, as the battle progressed, the divine beasts that remained would naturally be the strongest. Yi Xian already had an idea. At this moment, Yi Xian could only ask the Flower God's sword attendant to make some sacrifices. The moment the primal chaos law net disappeared, Yi Xian also disappeared. This was because Yi Xian had already hidden within the devouring space, but the Flower God's sword attendant was left behind. To be more precise, it was the Flower God's sword attendant that fled into the distance first, and the direction it fled in was the direction of an expert. Under Yi Xian's orders, the Flower God's sword attendant held a divine weapon that looked like the god's slaughtering sword. Although it was deliberately hidden, it still released a trace of its aura. As soon as the Flower God's sword attendant arrived at the expert's side, it handed the divine weapon to the expert without hesitation. That expert didn't think too much about it, so he casually took it. After all, this divine armament looked somewhat similar to the god's slaughtering sword. This was a high-grade replica that Yi Xian had spent a huge amount of faith points to exchange for from the system store. Chapter 2862. Ambush. Whether it was its appearance or charm, it was almost the same as the god's slaughtering sword. At the very least, it would be difficult to see the difference if one didn't observe carefully. After doing all of this, the Flower God's sword attendant committed suicide. That expert didn't even have time to react. At this moment, he still didn't know what had happened. He held a fake god's slaughtering sword in his hand, but he looked at the Flower God's sword attendant in astonishment. Hong Hu, you dare to attack? Suddenly, a voice rang out beside the expert. It turned out that someone had also noticed the anomaly. When he saw that Yi Xian's figure had already disappeared from the net of laws, combined with the fake god's slaughtering sword in the expert's hand, he would naturally be misunderstood. Thus, at this moment, There were people who charged towards the super expert without hesitation. "What are you doing?" the man asked, puzzled. Unfortunately, no one paid any attention to him. Previous chapter, next chapter, boom! With a punch, the expert named Hong, who was sent flying before he could figure out what was going on. The fake god slaughtering sword in his hand had already changed owners. "Quick, the treasure is over there." Following these words, in an instant, the expert who had just obtained the fake god slaughtering sword didn't even have the time to take a second look at the god slaughtering sword before he was surrounded. Chaos broke out. This time, it was even more bloody and brutal. If it was said that the divine beasts had only used 30% of their strength in the previous battle, then at this moment, they had already used 12% of their strength. The massacre had begun. It was a bloody and brutal massacre. In just an instant, the entire sky had been dyed red. Yi Xian could also see the changes in the outside world from within the devouring space. To be precise, Yi Xian didn't completely enter the devouring space. After all, the difference in speed between the devouring space and the outside world was too great. Yi Xian completely entering it wasn't a very wise choice. Thus, the place where Yi Xian was standing was actually the entrance to the devouring space. Here, Yi Xian was able to completely conceal his aura, yet maintain the same speed as the outside world. Thus, being in this position was a very good choice. Yi Xian silently watched the slaughter in the outside world. Although this slaughter was caused by him, Yi Xian didn't have the slightest bit of reluctance. Even if all of these experts from the demon god's divine domain died, Yi Xian wouldn't blink. It was not enough to describe the current situation. At that moment, in the sky and on the ground, there was a murderous aura everywhere. Especially around the fake god-slaying sword, it was even more terrifying. One expert after another died on the spot. The sky had already cracked, and the earth had already turned blood red. Countless experts had turned this area into 40,000 lands. As for the fake god-slaughtering sword, it was being passed around in the hands of the experts. However, it was a pity that any super expert who got their hands on it would be killed in an instant. However, if one person died, another would immediately take over. Life was not over, and the battle was endless. These people had already gone completely crazy. He had already turned into a madman. Yi Xian was terrified when he saw this. Only now did he know that there were countless divine beasts hiding in the shadows around him. These divine beasts were hiding in the shadows at the beginning, and did not participate in the battle. However, when the fake god slaughtering sword appeared, they appeared. Moreover, it seemed that the number of people hiding was far more than that. There were clearly strong cultivators falling at every moment, but there were still countless strong cultivators who continued to advance wave after wave. Life seemed so worthless at this moment. Of course, all of this had nothing to do with Yi Xian. Yi Xian was just waiting for the center of the battle to leave. Every single divine beast expert who obtained the fake god slaughtering sword immediately left. They didn't have the time to check if it was real or fake, and even if someone discovered that there was a problem with the fake god slaughtering sword, no one would listen to his explanation. Therefore, the center of the battle was constantly moving away. Day after day. Normally, it would only take an hour to travel a distance, but now, it took a full 3 days. This distance might not be considered too far, but Yi Xian couldn't wait any longer. After all, it was hard to avoid experts suspecting him. Once they turned around to look for him, Yi Xian might be trapped here. On the shattered ground, anyone could tell that an incomparably tragic battle had once broken out here. Saying that not a single blade of grass grew was not enough to describe the decline here. It could be said that even a slightly larger stone no longer existed. Suddenly, a small mound in the soil moved, and a figure emerged from it. The moment that figure appeared, he fled into the distance without hesitation. There wasn't even the slightest hesitation. This person was Yi Xian. At this moment, how could Yi Xian dare to stop at all? He practically used his full speed. Moreover, he was already prepared to be teleported into the mysterious trial space at any time. Because the requirements for strength in the trial space were too high, Yi Xian knew that it was useless for him to enter now. There were only a few chances to teleport, so Yi Xian wasn't willing to waste them. However, if there really was an expert chasing after him, then Yi Xian might not have a choice. Yi Xian's speed was extremely fast. At the beginning, there really wasn't anything unusual. However, when Yi Xian had only traveled less than 3 million kilometers, he discovered that he'd been locked onto by several divine senses at the same time. Yi Xian frowned. It seemed that there were still some intelligent divine beasts that suspected the location of the web of law, which was why this scene had occurred. It was very obvious that these people had come for Yi Xian from the start. However, the only thing that allowed Yi Xian to heave a sigh of relief was that since these people only dared to expose themselves now, it meant that they weren't super experts. Of course, Yi Xian didn't even know what his cultivation was. Yi Xian fled at an extremely fast speed because he knew very well that even if the enemy that had locked onto him wasn't too powerful, once he was entangled, he wouldn't have any good results. Unfortunately, the enemy obviously wouldn't allow Yi Xian to continue fleeing like this. Boom! Crash! A loud sound rang out. At the same time, a wall of water suddenly appeared around Yi Xian. To be more precise, it was a ball of water that completely surrounded Yi Xian. Water Law Barrier Domain. This was actually a special domain of the laws of water. Moreover, it wasn't a domain set up by a single person, but a formation domain set up by many people. System, what kind of domain is this? Yi Xian asked in confusion. This domain didn't seem to have too much power, at least on the surface. The light blue seawater surrounded this area. At the same time, it made the air in the center seem abnormally humid. However, the power was very gentle, causing people to not feel the slightest threat. Chapter 2863. A strange domain. Since someone had set up such a domain, then it probably wasn't that simple. Thus, at this moment, Yi Xian had no choice but to stop and quietly wait for the changes in the domain. Time slowly passed, but there was no change in the domain. However, half-human and half-fish demon beasts appeared from all directions. Some of these beasts were wielding tridents, some were wielding long swords, and some were even wielding longbows. However, their strength was generally very weak. Apart from their large numbers, there was almost no other redeeming feature. At this moment, Yi Xian slightly frowned. Could it be that the ones who set up the domain to capture him were these fishmen? If that's the case, then aren't you underestimating me too much? Yi Xian didn't use the god-slaughtering sword. Instead, he took out his rule bow and shot it out without the slightest hesitation. A violent force exploded out in the blink of an eye. One arrow was enough to kill thousands of these fishmen. Could it be that these mere people were really so weak and useless? Yi Xian was incomparably puzzled. However, just as Yi Xian was about to kill his way out, a strange change occurred. The fishmen that Yi Xian had blasted into smithereens actually quickly revived. What was even more terrifying was that even the enemies that Yi Xian had blasted into a bloody mist at the center of Yi Xian's attack were revived. Moreover, the strength of these revived fishmen had actually increased. What was going on? Yi Xian had never seen such a strange thing before. Yi Xian frowned slightly as he launched another attack towards the group of fishmen. A terrifying attack once again descended onto the newly revived fishmen. Just like last time, this group of fishmen was once again killed without any suspense. However, in the blink of an eye, those fishmen quickly revived. This time, Yi Xian saw it very clearly. These fishmen were truly able to increase their strength after reviving. When had Yi Xian ever seen such a terrifying scene? He could actually revive after death? Resurrection could also increase one's strength. I don't believe this. I want to see if you can resurrect infinitely. With a thought, Yi Xian pulled open the Law Divine Art once again and launched another attack. Yi Xian attacked, the fishman revived. Yi Xian attacked again, the fishman revived. After going back and forth dozens of times, Yi Xian finally gave up. These fishmen could actually revive infinitely, and their strength could increase. However, there was a limit to how much their strength could increase, and they could only increase it to the highest level, the inferior grade Divine Lord realm. A mere inferior grade 1 Divine Lord posed no threat to Yi Xian at all. However, who knew if these fishmen had any other special methods? Or rather, were there any other strange changes in this domain? Yi Xian didn't dare to delay any longer. This time, he directly released his might and 200 god-slaughtering swords to open a path. Yi Xian directly slaughtered a path of blood towards the edge of the domain. However, when Yi Xian arrived at the edge of the domain, he realized that this water barrier domain, which didn't seem to be anything special, wasn't something that could be broken just because he wanted to. First of all, this was not ordinary water of the Jianghu, but a type of heavy water. A mysterious heavy water that was as heavy as ore. Moreover, this heavy water was extremely difficult to break. Even if Yi Xian used his divine power to forcefully disperse it, it would still be difficult to break through. At this moment, how could Yi Xian not understand that if he wanted to break this domain, he couldn't break it by force? He could only find the person who used the domain and kill him, or find the cornerstone of the formation. Unfortunately, this was a formation set up by several people. It was already very difficult to find one person, let alone all of them. Yi Xian had been trapped here for so long, but he hadn't discovered anything at all. Therefore there was only one choice left for Yi Xian, and that was to find the core of the formation. However, how could it be that easy to find it? System. Do you have any ideas? Although Yi Xian knew in his heart that the system was helpless against him. Sure enough, the system's notification rang out. Ding! System notification. Host. Please note that the host does not have enough resources to directly break this domain. Yi Xian didn't have any eternal points, and he had consumed a huge amount of faith points. As for resources, he didn't have much left. Therefore, it was normal for the system to give him such a notification. It seemed that this time, Yi Xian could only exchange for some useful things in the system and then think of a way to break this domain himself. Who is playing tricks on me? Do you dare to stand out? Yi Xian shouted loudly. Although Yi Xian knew very well that the person in the dark wouldn't answer. Sure enough, other than the roars of the fishmen, the entire domain was silent. Yi Xian's divine sense quickly scanned his surroundings, but he couldn't find anything unusual. At this moment, Yi Xian's brows were tightly furrowed. Today, Yi Xian had encountered an unprecedented crisis. He didn't expect that after escaping the encirclement of those experts, he would fall into such a crisis again. And the most fundamental reason was that Yi Xian wasn't strong enough. Perhaps in the eyes of others, Yi Xian's leveling speed was already terrifying, but for Yi Xian, it was still insufficient. Yi Xian didn't even have the ability to resist those super experts with his cultivation base at the first-grade Divine Emperor realm. Of course, the people surrounding Yi Xian might not be as strong as Yi Xian. After all, if they were strong, they wouldn't be afraid to show their faces. However, this also showed that Yi Xian wasn't strong enough. If Yi Xian was a little stronger, then perhaps he wouldn't have been trapped by this domain. Yi Xian didn't make a move to kill the murlocs in front of him as he watched them advance one after another. In any case, these fishmen weren't a threat to Yi Xian at all. Yi Xian wanted to see what other methods the enemies hiding in the shadows had. Yi Xian didn't believe that these fellows really hoped that these fishmen would be able to kill him. As expected, seeing that Yi Xian wasn't killing those fishmen. Once again, a strange change occurred in the domain. Groups of fishmen kept gathering and actually devouring each other. Moreover, the strangest thing was that after these fishmen devoured each other, their realms actually increased. There were groups of fishmen gathered together, but they were quietly lining up, waiting for the fishmen at the very front to devour them. As it continued to devour, the realm of the fishmen also continued to increase. At first, it was only at the lower first-grade Divine Lord realm, but after devouring, it actually rose to the upper first-grade Divine Emperor realm. The strangest thing was that once all the fishmen reached the upper first-grade Divine Emperor realm, they stopped devouring each other. But even so, there were still 1,000 upper first-grade Divine Emperor realm fishmen in front of Yi Xian. Most importantly, Yi Xian still couldn't kill them. Chapter 2864. Strange fishmen. Even though they were all at the first grade of the Divine Emperor realm, these fishmen were already able to harm Yi Xian. Even if Yi Xian released the Divine Wood Sword Attendant, what use was there in a situation where he could only defend and not attack? If this continued, Yi Xian was destined to die. Unless Yi Xian chose to teleport into that special trial space, or perhaps hide in the devouring space. Yi Xian continuously created defensive divine talismans one after another, transforming them into energy shields. Unfortunately, even so, these divine talismans would eventually be broken. Thus, it was useless to continue wearing them down like this. In the sky, on the ground, and even underground, with Yi Xian as the center, rays of protective light continuously flickered. Outside the light, the crazy fishmen continued to attack. For these fishmen, the thing they were least afraid of was death, because once they died, not only could they revive, their strength would also increase. Therefore, their attacks could be said to be endless and incomparably berserk. For a moment, Yi Xian was trapped on the spot. However, Yi Xian didn't move at all. Aside from occasionally replenishing his divine talisman defense, Yi Xian didn't even spare a glance at the fishmen outside. Instead, he wholeheartedly searched for a loophole in this domain. Yi Xian was also a formation master. Combined with his experience in creating divine talismans and refining magic treasures, it could be said that Yi Xian's comprehension of formations was extraordinary. Unfortunately, this time, the enemy had used a formation to set up a domain, so it contained both the profoundness of the formation and the miraculous power of the domain. Thus, it wouldn't be easy for Yi Xian to break through it. At this moment, Yi Xian's attention was completely focused. He released his divine sense and continuously explored. He wouldn't let go of even the tiniest corner. Over and over again, Yi Xian's divine sense quickly searched the entire domain. This domain was exquisite, but the person who set it up had underestimated Yi Xian. This was because Yi Xian's mastery of formations exceeded that of ordinary people. The formation domain had its own advantages. However, in front of Yi Xian, there were also disadvantages. Yi Xian abruptly raised his head and looked at the center of the entire domain. There, waves of powerful energy were constantly fluctuating. That was the place where the energy of the entire domain was the most concentrated. That was also the place where the defense of the entire domain was the strongest. However, it was there that Yi Xian discovered the weakness of the domain. It could be said that this entire domain was extremely complete. Through the senses of his spiritual will, Yi Xian could even sense that even underground, he was still completely enveloped by the domain's power. The entire domain formed a circle, and the heavy water continued to flow, forming the entire domain. It was like a hollow ball of water, and Yi Xian was trapped in the center of it. At this moment, Yi Xian discovered that the top of the water ball was where the heavy water was flowing. To Yi Xian, that was the only chance to leave. The power of the heavy water was incomparably powerful. Coupled with the rapid flow of water, it was impossible for Yi Xian to forcefully charge out of the surroundings. Only at the joint would a very small hole occasionally appear due to the collision of the power of water. That was Yi Xian's chance. In Yi Xian's heart, he was once again certain that the person who set up this formation domain wasn't an expert. After all, how powerful was the formation domain? How could there be a loophole? Since there was a loophole, then there was only one explanation, and that was that the people controlling the formation domain were not strong enough to make the formation domain appear perfectly. Of course. No matter what the reason was, there was at least one thing that was certain. Yi Xian's chance had come. With a sudden leap, Yi Xian didn't hesitate in the slightest as he directly flew towards the center. Wei Zhantian controlled the god-slaughtering sword to circle around Yi Xian, while the divine wood sword attendant followed closely behind him. In the blink of an eye, Yi Xian had already arrived at the center. However, since Yi Xian was able to discover the loophole in the center, how could the enemy not know? Therefore, at this moment, countless water tentacles extended out from the walls of water. As soon as those tentacles appeared, they lashed out at Yi Xian. Some of them even turned into water swords that filled the sky as they pounced towards Yi Xian. In an instant, the entire sky was completely surrounded by these weapons made of heavy water. It could be said that they were so dense that there wasn't even a single gap. However, there would still be a gap between attacks. At this moment, Yi Xian's spiritual will had already been mobilized to its maximum, and his entire figure was constantly dodging. Of course, as he dodged, he was still flying upwards. The power of unlimited teleportation was displayed to the extreme in this small area of dodging. It was as if the entire sky was filled with Yi Xian's figures. As Yi Xian flew upwards, the density of the attacks became tighter and tighter. Obviously, the enemy was getting anxious. But even so, he couldn't do anything to Yi Xian. Dodging, advancing, dodging again, advancing again. Yi Xian pressed forward. No matter how the people in front of him tried to stop him, Yi Xian wouldn't stop. Wei Zhantian, who was controlling the god-slaying sword, had long since unleashed its maximum speed. Its extremely fast speed allowed the god-slaughtering sword to have the power to pierce through the heavy water. At the same time, it could also help Yi Xian block some of the water pillars that he didn't have time to dodge. Break for me! Suddenly, Yi Xian let out a loud roar as he charged towards the center of the area. Without a sound, Yi Xian charged out of the water ball. When Yi Xian hovered outside the water ball, he saw the person who set up the formation in an attempt to trap him. 9 strange fishmen. Compared to the fishmen in the domain, they were even uglier and weirder. Other than a pair of legs, The rest of these 9 fishmen's bodies were basically fish? They said they didn't take human form? Obviously, that wasn't the case. Since they were able to set up such a formation domain together, it was obvious that they had the strength to take human form. Thus, the only explanation was that they looked down on the human form from the start. Almost all the divine beasts that cultivated were clear about one thing. That was, in human form, it was extremely beneficial to the comprehension and use of the laws. The divine beast's main body might be able to obtain a boost in physique, strength, and other aspects. But if they wanted to quickly comprehend the laws and unleash the power of the laws to its fullest, they still needed to take human form. It was impossible for these 9 fishmen to not know about this. But why did they not choose to take human form? Even without anyone telling Yi Xian was extremely clear in his heart that if the 9-headed fishman were to transform into a human and use this formation domain, then it wouldn't be so easy for Yi Xian to walk out. Thus, for a moment, Yi Xian became interested in the 9 strange fish. System, detect these 9 monsters for me. I want to see what's so special about them. Chapter 2865. Continue to escape along with Yi Xian's order. The system's prompt quickly sounded out. Ding! System prompt. Yi Xian has 150,000 faith points. Does the host confirm? 150,000 faith points? Yi Xian was slightly stunned. It wasn't because of the amount of faith points he had, but because of the system's prompt. It seemed that every time Yi Xian needed to investigate something, he would need faith points. Yi Xian didn't notice when it started, but now that he suddenly noticed it, he discovered that every time he used the system to detect something, he would more or less consume some faith points. Faith points could be said to be the easiest thing for Yi Xian to obtain. Compared to eternal points, devouring points, and so on, faith points would only increase at any time, and the amount of increase was quite a bit. Moreover, as long as Yi Xian was willing, then after controlling the new territory, the rate at which his faith points increased would be even faster. Therefore, Yi Xian hadn't cared too much about faith points. He'd even thought that the faith point system was only used to exchange for other points, such as eternal points and devouring points. But now, it seemed that this wasn't the case at all. It seemed that there were still many uses for faith points. Moreover, the consumption was also extremely huge. With doubt in his mind, Yi Xian agreed to the detection. Ding! System prompt. The target is the Resentment Divine Fish Clan, one of the subsidiary races of the ancient demonic fish divine throne. They have an extremely heavy grudge against the human clan. Once they meet the human clan, they will definitely not rest until they die. Ding! The Resentment Divine Fish Clan is a special rare race. You have detected an optional mission, a rare race collector. Quest, rare race collector, quest requirements. Find a suitable space to collect all kinds of rare races scattered throughout the God Realm and tame them. The quest was optional, and there was no punishment for failure. If one collected a certain amount, they could open a special treasure chest. Collection quest? Moreover, there was no punishment. Yi Xian would definitely do it. After all, to others, this special space wasn't easy to find. However, Yi Xian had a devouring space with him, so it wasn't a problem to divide up some areas. Of course, since this quest was a race collection quest, then a rare race would probably require Yi Xian to collect at least 2 divine beasts, 1 male and 1 female. Yi Xian didn't hesitate and directly accepted the quest. This 9-headed fish wasn't very strong. Once Yi Xian broke through their formation domain, it could be said that they wouldn't be a threat at all. In addition, when Yi Xian heard the system's notification, he knew that this strange fish would attack as long as it saw a human, so he wasn't too worried about being hunted down by the treasure-snatching team. Thus, at this moment, Yi Xian once again asked the system, "System, why do I need to consume faith points to use detection right now?" Yi Xian had to figure this out. Otherwise, no matter how many faith points he had, he wouldn't be able to use them up. Yi Xian wouldn't be able to squander them like this. Ding! System notification. Host, please note, along with the host's realm prompt, the target's strength will increase accordingly, so the system will need to use faith points to strengthen the detection. So that's how it is. Yi Xian nodded. Yi Xian understood the system's explanation. It seemed that no matter how many faith points he had, if Yi Xian didn't save them, it wouldn't be enough. When he returned his gaze to the strange fish, he discovered that the 9-headed fish had actually started to quickly escape. However, after ambushing Yi Xian, he wanted to immediately escape? How could it be so easy? Wei Zhantian out. With Yi Xian's order, the two god-slaughtering swords immediately flew out. Of course, the goal of the god-slaughtering sword this time wasn't to kill these strange fish, but to trap them. Wei Zhentian controlled the god-slaughtering sword and its speed was extremely fast. After a moment, it arrived beside the strange fish. The two god-slaughtering swords emitted sword light and easily trapped the strange fish. The strange fish was incomparably terrified as it continuously screamed. It was obvious that it was already afraid of Yi Xian. Unfortunately, it was already too late for them to be afraid. When they first tried to surround and kill Yi Xian, they should have been able to think of such a result. Within the devouring space, Yi Xian once again opened up a special area. In this place, Yi Xian set up layers upon layers of restrictions and even seals. Afterwards, Yi Xian didn't even ask for the opinions of these strange fish and directly absorbed them into the devouring space. The pitiful nine-headed fish wanted to ambush Yi Xian but failed. Instead, it became Yi Xian's prisoner. And what awaited them would be endless domestication. After all, only by completely taming them would Yi Xian be able to complete his mission. Yi Xian didn't care too much about the rewards for collecting rare races. Just the fun of collecting them was worth it for Yi Xian to do. As soon as the strange fish disappeared, the formation domain and the fishmen inside also disappeared. Obviously, they were summoned by the nine-headed fish. Yi Xian didn't dare to stay here any longer. After all, no one knew if there would be enemies chasing after him. After all, Yi Xian wouldn't think of every divine beast expert as retarded as he was. Yi Xian's movements were extremely fast. Unfortunately, his doubts still erupted in the end. First, a strand of spiritual will swept past Yi Xian's body. Just as Yi Xian reacted, that strand of spiritual will had already locked onto him. Damn it! I've been discovered. Yi Xian was overwhelmed with shock. Since his spiritual will had already discovered him, it wouldn't be long before the divine beast expert caught up. Yi Xian displayed his greatest speed and quickly fled. Unfortunately, that spiritual will was tightly locked onto Yi Xian. System, refine restrictions and divine talismans to stop that person behind me. Yi Xian couldn't care less. After all, it wasn't as if Yi Xian's spiritual will hadn't detected anything, but he hadn't discovered anything. This meant that the person whose spiritual will had locked onto him was definitely much stronger than Yi Xian. Thus, the only thing Yi Xian could do was flee. Yet he still ran away when he saw the enemy? This was an extremely shameful thing to do. However, even though he knew that the enemy was incomparably powerful and that it was impossible for him to defeat them, he still tried to fight. That would be the behavior of a fool. Thus, how could Yi Xian care about face at this moment? Moreover, the fake god-slaughtering sword would be exposed sooner or later. Once it was exposed, then those furious divine beast experts would naturally understand that Yi Xian had set them up. If they chased after him, how could Yi Xian have a chance? Divine Wood Sword Attendant, come out. Go, block the pursuers for me. Within the formation domain, whether it was the fishmen or the heavy water attacks, they were actually unable to harm the Divine Wood Sword Attendant in the slightest. At this moment, Yi Xian could only send the Divine Wood Sword Attendant out again. Wanshuan Sword Attendant, follow the Divine Wood Sword Attendant to investigate. Once there's any news, report back immediately. Yi Xian once again released the Wanshuan Sword Attendant. Although this little fellow was incomparably weak, it was still useful for detection. One divine rune after another descended, transforming into restrictions that slowed down the enemy. Yi Xian didn't dare to stop at all as he continuously fled forward. As he fled, Yi Xian could feel the divine will that had locked onto him fluctuate a few times. Yi Xian could guess that perhaps the Divine Wood Sword Attendant had already fought with him. Chapter 2866. Substance Illusion. He didn't know how far he'd gone, but the divine sense that locked onto Yi Xian had disappeared. Not long after, the sword servant returned with a divine beast corpse in his hand. This time, it could be said that Yi Xian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Only now did Yi Xian realize that he'd underestimated his own strength, underestimated the strength of the Divine Wood Sword Attendant. For a long time, the Thousand Beast Sword Attendant had always been a supporting existence and rarely fought alone. But in reality, the current Divine Wood Sword Attendant already had the strength to fight alone against enemies. It was even slightly stronger than Yi Xian. For example, this time, Yi Xian only wanted the Divine Wood Sword Attendant to stop the enemy. It could be said that he never thought that the Divine Wood Sword Attendant would be able to kill the enemy. However, the Divine Wood Sword Attendant did it. Not only did he complete the mission that Yi Xian gave him, he even killed the enemy. Yi Xian looked at the Divine Beast corpse in the hands of the Divine Wood Sword Attendant and felt rather helpless in his heart. Just as he was about to devour the corpse, he didn't expect that this time, Yi Xian would actually find a universe ring on the Divine Beast's body. It wasn't that Divine Beasts didn't know how to use universe rings, but compared to the Kunlun Divine Domain, the ratio of Divine Beasts in the Demon God Divine Domain holding universe rings wasn't that high. Yi Xian first took the universe ring with a puzzled heart. Because the Divine Beast was already dead, the spiritual will seal on it wasn't very strong, even if it was much stronger than Yi Xian when it was alive. But now, Yi Xian was still able to easily undo it. It was a pile of miscellaneous materials mixed with some spirit stones. It seemed that this Divine Beast couldn't be considered rich. But just as Yi Xian was about to casually devour it, he unexpectedly discovered a special item. Ding! System notification. Special material detected. Realm Guarding Illusion Bead. Realm Guarding Illusion Bead? What is this? Yi Xian opened the introduction and carefully looked at it. The Realm Guarding Illusion Bead was a teleportation bead that could be used to enter a special secret realm. Through this bead, one could be teleported to a specific illusion. Wait, illusion? Secret realm? Yi Xian was puzzled and instantly clicked on the information about the illusion. Illusions were a type of secret realm. However, they were not ordinary secret realms. Instead, they were hidden by a special method to store resources or other special purposes. Illusions were usually not very big, but what was inside was set up according to the master's wishes. Speaking of which, it could be considered to be of a higher level than a secret realm. So that's how it is. Yi Xian nodded. To put it bluntly, this thing was just a warehouse. However, Yi Xian's devouring space came with him. While this demonic beast could only use an illusion pearl to teleport, Yi Xian only hesitated for a moment before immediately making a decision. In any case, he might be chased down if he stayed outside, so he might as well enter this illusion. It would be safer. Thinking of this, Yi Xian no longer hesitated. He casually swallowed the Divine Beast's corpse and crushed the illusion bead. Similar to using a teleportation talisman, Yi Xian was quickly teleported to the entrance of a secret realm. This was a cave, but it was obvious that this cave wasn't that simple. As expected, when Yi Xian walked inside, he discovered that he was walking downhill. However, when he looked at the cave with his naked eye, even if he used his spiritual will to detect it, all he could see was a flat road. When Yi Xian turned around to look at his feet, he discovered that there was a faint circle of light around his body. Illusion technique. This cave turned out to be a place sealed by an illusion lock. The explanation for the illusion technique was actually very simple. It meant that the illusion technique had already materialized, and there was no method to unlock it like the illusion bead. Thus, those who entered could only walk on the normal path of the cave, and would not be able to discover anything special about this place. They would only treat this place as a cave. However, with the illusion bead, the person who entered would be automatically guided by the power of the illusion bead, break open a new path, and then head underground. Yi Xian no longer had any doubts and continued walking forward. After walking for an unknown period of time, Yi Xian's eyes finally lit up. At the same time, he heard the sound of dripping water. In the distance, the noise of some monkeys could be heard. Could it be that this was a monkey cave? However, Yi Xian remembered that the divine beast that was killed by the Divine Wood Sword Attendant wasn't a monkey. What was going on? Or could it be said that the divine beast had only obtained such an illusion bead, and this secret realm did not belong to him? It was only equivalent to an invitation, and only allowed him to enter? Of course, the divine beast was already dead, so Yi Xian couldn't confirm anything. This secret realm wasn't very big, and the strength of the apes inside wasn't very strong. Yi Xian only needed to use his divine sense to scan through the entire secret realm. Apart from a set of armor and a broadsword in the center, there was only one tombstone that was worthy of Yi Xian's attention. Great wisdom, great martial progenitor, the tomb of the heavenly divine monkey. This secret realm was actually a tomb? After a long time, Yi Xian actually ran over to the tomb of the monkey ancestor. Gigi, who are you? Suddenly, a little monkey jumped in front of Yi Xian and blinked its eyes as it asked him. The little monkey's eyes were extremely clear, and it didn't have the slightest bit of enmity towards Yi Xian. Thus, Yi Xian naturally wouldn't unreasonably kill him. Instead, he casually replied, "I am Yi Xian." Yi Xian, Zhizhi. I've never heard of it. Zhizhi, what are you doing here? Could it be for the blessing of the ancestor? Ancestor. It was the ancestor again. Within the demon god's divine domain, the most mysterious thing was probably the power of the ancestor. The most common was also the power of the ancestor. It could be said that the power of the ancestor was everywhere. Who would have thought that there would be a mention of the ancestor's blessing here? Yi Xian frowned slightly, but didn't refute. Instead, he asked, "How did you know?" Zhizhi, since you've come here, if it's not for the blessing of the ancestor, then what else could it be for? Let's go. I'll take you to see my ancestor. Ancestor? It was just that he didn't know if this so-called ancestor was speaking of grief and indignation, or if it was a name. Of course, no matter what it was, Yi Xian didn't care. In any case, there was no existence in this cave that could threaten Yi Xian, so Yi Xian didn't hesitate to follow. A moment later, Yi Xian was brought in front of an old monkey by the little monkey. This old monkey was extremely old, and it also didn't have much cultivation. Ancestor. There is a human who wants to seek the ancestor's blessing. Human race? You said it's a human race? The ancestor raised his head in confusion and looked at Yi Xian. After confirming Yi Xian's identity as a human, he doubtfully asked, "It's been 1,000,000 years since a human has come here. Little fellow, tell me, what's wrong with your human race? Why hasn't anyone come here in the past 1,000,000 years? Could it be that your human race is going to be exterminated as well?" Extermination? Chapter 2867. Wanted list. Why do you say that my human race is about to be annihilated? Yi Xian asked his ancestor with a puzzled expression. Isn't that so? In the ancestral spirit cave, as long as the geniuses of the various races meet the requirements, they can enter and obtain the blessings of my monkey god clan's ancestor. It has been more than 1,000,000 years since I took over and managed it, but not a single one of you humans have come. Isn't it because you are too weak that you were eliminated by the myriad races? The power of the ancestor was also open to the human race? It was open at least 1,000,000 years ago? These words instantly caused Yi Xian to have doubts in his heart. However, from the mouth of the ancestor of the monkey clan, Yi Xian could tell that their clan had always been guarding this secret realm and had never had any contact with the outside world. Therefore, they probably didn't know what Yi Xian said. Naturally, there was no need for Yi Xian to look for trouble. Of course not. Our human race is developing very well right now. It's just that we haven't obtained the illusion bead yet. Yi Xian's reply caused the old monkey to glance at Yi Xian in confusion. With a wave of his hand, a screen of light appeared in front of the old monkey. There were obviously some things recorded on it, but unfortunately, Yi Xian couldn't understand them. That shouldn't be the case. According to the rules set by the ancestors, I distribute the human clan's illusion beads every year, and the human clan's patriarch has also received them. Why do you say that the human clan has never obtained an illusion bead? Yi Xian naturally knew why. Simply put, these illusion beads had probably fallen into the hands of other races a long time ago. This mysterious place had no connection with the outside world, so naturally, they would believe whatever the other races said. Even if they had doubts, they wouldn't be able to verify it. The current Kunlun divine domain no longer had a place for the human clan. Thus, it wasn't surprising that the extra illusion beads were stolen by the juniors of other powerful races. Yi Xian felt that this ancestral land of the monkey clan was a place that had already existed before the Battle of the Dusk of the Gods. Just like how Yi Xian needed to rebuild his faith, this piece of land rented by the monkey clan was probably also a land of faith. However, their will was for the 10,000 races to coexist and not interfere. They only distributed the illusion clan every once in a while so that the geniuses of the various races could enter this place and obtain the blessings of the ancestors. Could it be that in the ancient times, in the demon god's divine domain, the various races actually coexisted peacefully? Then why did it turn out like this now? Why did the human clan become the target of the other race's suppression? And it was a suppression that left no way out? For a moment, Yi Xian's heart was filled with doubts. However, he naturally couldn't resolve it right now. Thus, Yi Xian could only put his doubts in his heart and follow the monkey clansman forward. The land rented by the monkey clan was naturally blessed by the ancestor of the monkey clan. However, He didn't know what kind of blessing he would give Yi Xian. Yi Xian was led to stand on a platform. After everything was prepared, he saw a few monkey clansmen chanting and directing a ray of light to Yi Xian's body. Yi Xian had already experienced the blessing of the ancestor once, so he wasn't afraid at all. The duration of the ancestor's blessing this time wasn't considered long, and what Yi Xian obtained was only a bit of agility enhancement. All in all, the ancestor's blessing in the monkey clan's rented land was very ordinary. Of course, to Yi Xian, the most important thing wasn't to say what he received from the blessing, but to say that he saw a possibility in the rented land. A possibility that was almost inevitable in ancient times. The possibility of the human clan of the demon god's realm coexisting peacefully with the other races and competing equally. Unfortunately, over the course of countless years, everything had changed. Then when did it start to change? What was the reason for the change? Yi Xian's strength was limited, and his time was even more limited. It would be extremely difficult for him to save the entire human clan of the demon god's realm. If he could find the source of the matter and deal with the conflict between the human clan of the demon god's realm and the other races from the source, perhaps that would be the best solution. Of course, this matter could only be carried out step by step. After all, Yi Xian had no clue. After retreating from the monkey clan's ancestral grounds, Yi Xian discovered that it was difficult for him to find any traces of the place. At this moment, Yi Xian was still standing in the cave. However, he didn't discover anything about the monkey clan's ancestral grounds. Even if Yi Xian were to dig into the ground, he wouldn't be able to discover anything. The only way to reach the monkey clan's ancestral grounds was through the illusion orb. At this moment, once Yi Xian retreated, there was nothing he could do. Of course, after retreating from the monkey clan's ancestral grounds, Yi Xian was temporarily safe because he didn't know where this place was. Why was it temporarily safe? Finally, an incomparably powerful expert seized the god slaughtering sword and discovered that the god slaughtering sword was a fake. In addition, a divine beast had once sensed the battle between Yi Xian and the strange fish, and in an instant, it thought that it and the others had been deceived. Yi Xian's appearance hadn't been hidden from the beginning, so all the experts knew of Yi Xian's appearance. As a result, a large number of wanted posters were quickly issued, and all of them were wanted posters with heavy rewards. At this moment, Yi Xian walked forward. He didn't have any goals. Originally, he was going to search for the holy sons of the various clans and find Luo Luo's whereabouts after defeating them. However, Yi Xian knew that once those supreme experts discovered the fake god slaughtering sword, they definitely wouldn't let him off. Therefore, he didn't dare to rashly cause trouble. Even if he wanted to find the holy son to ask, it wouldn't be at this time. During this period of time, it was best for Yi Xian to keep a low profile. Of course, this was also because Yi Xian didn't know that the arrest warrant for him had already been issued. Otherwise, Yi Xian wouldn't need to hide like this. After 2 days, Yi Xian finally found a city. Divine beasts rarely built cities, and even if they did, they definitely wouldn't be as large as the cities built by the humans of the Kunlun divine realm. Moreover, it could be said that every city had its own characteristics. For example, the city that Yi Xian was currently seeing. This city was built by a race called the Great Ant Race. This Great Ant Race was rather special. They had a clear division of labor similar to ants, and their internal organization was extremely strict. However, they were so huge that they couldn't be called ants at all. It could only be said that they were a special race that had learned the organizational structure of ants. Legend had it that the Great Ant Race was not a race from the god realm, but from some mysterious place. However, there was no way to prove this legend. Even the Great Ant Race did not know about it. Therefore, this legend could only be said to be over. When Yi Xian walked into the city, he felt a sense of oppression. The appearance of the Great Ant Race was similar to that of a human. It had 2 legs, 4 arms, and its face was also very similar to that of a human. However, there was no hair on its head, but 2 strange tentacles. Of course, their tentacles had many uses. As for its body, it was divided into 3 parts and covered in scales. From its appearance, it looked like an ant. This was probably the origin of the name of the Great Ant Race. It could be said that even a blind person would be able to tell that the god's slaughtering sword was extraordinary. It was inevitable that there would be people who would have ulterior motives. At this moment, a group of people were secretly communicating with a secret sound transmission technique. However, they were clearly extremely fearful, not only because of Yi Xian's strength, but also because this was the territory of the Great Ant clan. Yi Xian casually ordered some food and prepared to rest here for a while. After all, Yi Xian was still a bit tired from the fearful escape route. Thus, at this moment, Yi Xian couldn't help but relax his vigilance, so he didn't notice their movements in time. At this moment, Yi Xian was still sitting in his seat, unaware of the approaching danger. A customer in the restaurant hurriedly ran out, and not long after, a sound transmission talisman flew out. After eating, Yi Xian walked out. Yi Xian didn't know where to go in the Great Ant Clan city, so he just casually strolled around. At this moment, a young man ran in front of Yi Xian. "Senior, is this your first time in my Great Ant city?" Yi Xian glanced at that person. His strength was very ordinary, so he didn't mind and only nodded. "Senior, how about this? Where do you want to go? This lowly one will bring you there. When the time comes, you can just give this lowly one a reward. Do you think that's okay?" So that was what this guy meant. The profession of guide was something that almost every city had. It wasn't anything special, so Yi Xian didn't think too much about it and directly asked, "Tell me, is there any place worth going to here?" "Senior, you've asked the right person. Great Ant City is the territory of the Great Ant race, and the Great Ant race is famous for their strictness, so the magic treasures they make can be said to be the most exquisite. The Treasure Gathering Pavilion is the largest auction venue in Great Ant City, and of course, other than that, the Seven Bloody Nights is also a good place to go. The Seven Bloody Nights is an entertainment venue, and it can be said that as long as you have enough spirit stones, you can enjoy all the services you want there." That person started to introduce Yi Xian without end. This time, Yi Xian had come to relax, so he immediately fell in love with the Seven Bloody Nights. Seven Bloody Nights. This name is a bit interesting. Tell me, what's so special about it?